I was engaged to Xie Chonglou for 16 years, and then suddenly, he came to break off the engagement. Later, I went to the Empress Dowager and forced him to marry me. After we married, he treated me with nothing but humiliation and coldness. He even brought back a woman and announced that he wanted to divorce me and marry her. At that time, the Liu family had already fallen, and even the Empress Dowager refused to help me. But I had a fiery spirit and couldn't tolerate such humiliation. On their wedding night, I set fire to the general's residence. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself reborn, 1 month before the engagement was broken. This time, before he could speak, I took the initiative to enter the palace and sought a decree from the Empress Dowager. Your servant has no fate with General Xie. Let us call off the engagement and find new partners. With the engagement annulled, Xie Chonglou should have been pleased, but he received the decree and still came to the Liu family to see me every day. I couldn't stand his persistence, so I had my maid, Zhaoyi, send him a message. If you don't want to marry me, doesn't this act of mine suit your wishes? Why do you keep pestering me? That night, I pushed open the window and saw Xie Chonglou, dressed in black, climbing over the wall. He stopped in front of my window, gritting his teeth, and asked me, "Lu Zhaoyi, who said I don't want to marry you?" My engagement with Xie Chonglou was arranged from the moment I was born. The Liu family is a prestigious family, but the honor of the Xie family was earned by Xie Chonglou's father, who returned from the battlefield with his sword in hand. My parents admired his bravery and loyalty to the emperor, so before I was even born, they promised my hand to the Xie family. Because of this, Xie Chonglou and I grew up playing together. He was mischievous and unruly, often caught by Uncle Xie and whipped. Once, after learning some swordplay, he showed off in front of me, but his strength gave out, and the tip of the sword cut across my cheek, causing blood to flow. Uncle Xie punished him by making him kneel in the snow for half a day. I went to plead for him, but he grabbed my skirt while kneeling and asked, "Is your wound serious?" I lowered my gaze and saw the usual rebellious look in his eyes, now filled with regret. He bit his lip, raised his hand to wipe away my blood, and softly apologized. "I'm sorry, Zhao. It's my fault for showing off when I'm not skilled enough. Wait for me. In the future, I'll go to the battlefield, win military merit, and earn a title to make up for it." That day, snow fell heavily. He knelt in the snow, dressed in black with his dark hair, and the vast white snow behind him reflected the most handsome face I had ever seen. His pupils were jet black, his complexion pale like jade, his lips faintly colored, but there was a small, crimson teardrop-shaped mole at the corner of his eye, the most vivid color in an otherwise muted scene. That image stayed with me for a long time. His promise echoed in my ears, but in the blink of an eye, I remembered the previous life, when he came to break off our engagement. He stood in front of me, his face filled with disdain. "We've never had any feelings for each other. Is it fun to keep pestering me? I don't understand how the Liu family's girls are so shameless. Could it be that your family, with its scholarly tradition, only reads The Art of Thick-Faced People?" I didn't know what the art of thick-faced people was, but I clearly saw in his eyes. Xie Chonglou no longer loved me. The boy who apologized to me in the snow, who rode his horse through the outskirts of the capital to find me the first spring camellia, was frozen in that snowstorm, forever stuck in my dreamlike memories. But now, I didn't even want those memories anymore. I snapped back to reality, and Xie Chonglou's face, filled with disdain in my memories, gradually merged with the proud young man standing before me. Suddenly, I felt disheartened and raised my hand to close the window. "So what? Xie Chonglou, I don't want to marry anymore." But he blocked the window with his arm, his gaze intense. "Why? Have you fallen for someone else?" The one who had already shifted his affections was asking me. I was so angry I almost laughed, but the words that came to my lips felt weary, and I couldn't be bothered to argue further. You can think of it that way. Yet he still wouldn't leave. He even braced himself against the window and climbed inside. The moonlight blended into his cold eyes, like mist rising from a mountain spring. Though we were the same age, Xie Chonglou was a whole head taller than me. Now, Looking down at me from above, there was a sharpness in his presence. Go ahead, tell me who it is, I'm going to see for myself, other than me, who in this entire capital is worthy of you. Yes, this was Xie Chonglou, always proud, passionate, and straightforward. He loved me like this. And when he didn't love me, he was even more resolute. I gripped my palm tightly, using the sharp pain to mask the rush of emotions in my heart, and spoke each word slowly. Anyone but you is worthy of me. Because I don't like you anymore, Xie Chonglou. The young man froze, and as the moonlight fell on him, he gritted his teeth and said, I don't believe it. When you were 12, you said you would marry me. You took my hairpin, my jade pendant, my zither. I don't believe you'd change your heart, Lu Zhaoyi. I won't believe it. His words reminded me. I turned and retrieved the hairpin and jade pendant he had given me from the jewelry box and handed them back to him. Here they are. As for the zither, I'll have it sent to the general's residence tomorrow. Xie Chonglou refused to take them. Zhaolu, you've told me how you feel. I sighed. But people's feelings change. Life is truly strange. In my previous life, Xie Chonglou and I had a similar conversation, but the positions were reversed. I tried to keep my back straight and talked to Xie Chonglou about the past, about the gifts, and the deep feelings they carried. But in front of me, he smashed the zither, threw away the jade pendant and hairpin, and mocked me. Miss Liu, people's feelings always change. But how could they change so completely? This was a question I didn't understand in my previous life, and now it was his turn. Late at night, in the cool wind, Xie Chonglou stood silently in front of me for a moment, then suddenly relaxed his expression. Lu Zhaoyi, I don't believe a word you've said. Even if you dislike me so much now, you won't skip the palace banquet, will you? I stared at him. Your feelings may have changed, but surely your courage hasn't shrunk too? After saying this, he didn't look at me again, but swiftly braced himself against the window and jumped out. In the blink of an eye, he was gone. I held the hairpin and jade pendant, staring at the empty window, unsure of what to say. Only my heart, beating wildly in my chest, reminded me. I still couldn't help but be moved by this proud and spirited Xie Chonglou. In fact, in my previous life, after marrying Xie Chonglou, we became a couple full of resentment for 5 years. He hated me, but still took pleasure in tormenting me in bed, even asking mockingly, Since you're marrying me no matter what, shouldn't you be enjoying this? After Uncle Xie and Aunt Xie passed away, he didn't even come to my room anymore, wouldn't even touch the things I had used. Once, we attended a palace banquet together, and, at the teasing of the Prime Minister's wife, I offered him a piece of pastry. Xie Chonglou deliberately knocked the plate onto the floor, wiped his hands with a cloth, and casually apologized. I knocked it over by accident. I'm sorry for disappointing the madam's good intentions. Anyone could tell it was intentional. At that moment, when our eyes met, I suddenly realized this was no longer the Xie Chonglou who loved me deeply 5 years ago. He had completely turned into a stranger. And I didn't even know why. The day before the palace banquet, my mother came to my room and asked, If you don't want to go tomorrow, I'll tell the Empress Dowager you've caught a cold and are bedridden. Her eyes were filled with unmasked concern. I shook my head. It's fine, I'll go. Of course, I had to go. How could I let Xie Chonglou have the pleasure of laughing at me? She sighed and gently stroked my hair. You and Chonglou grew up together. I thought there would be some feelings between you two, but we were wrong to settle the engagement so early. It's my fault. I sniffled. I know. The broken engagement has caused trouble for the Liu family. My mother scolded. How could it be trouble? Your marriage should be decided according to your wishes. In my previous life, I insisted on marrying Xie Chonglou, which, in the eyes of the emperor, was a matter of collusion between the civil and military factions, which he naturally couldn't tolerate. Soon after we married, the power of the Liu family was gradually diminished. My father, though holding a high position, was relegated to a ceremonial role and had no real power anymore. As for the Xie family, Thanks to Xie Chonglou's maneuvering, it was able to maintain its position. Later, I grew to feel how unfamiliar he had become, not just because he had gone from loving me deeply to hating me just as deeply, but also because the Xie Chonglou, who once despised court intrigue and wanted to use his military exploits to earn me a noble title, had, somewhere along the way, become the very person he used to loathe: smooth, worldly, and calculating. The next day, I woke up early and spent a long time getting ready. I wore a pomegranate red pleated skirt with cloud patterns and paired it with an entire set of pearl and ruby jewelry, both elegant and exquisite. But as soon as the carriage stopped at the palace gates, I ran into Xie Chonglou. He raised an eyebrow and smiled slightly at me. "Did you dress up so beautifully today because you knew you'd be seeing me?" How full of himself. I pulled at the corner of my lips. "General Xie, you think too much. Our engagement has been annulled. I dressed up today because I'm hoping to find a new suitor at the palace banquet." Xie Chonglou's face darkened instantly, and he gritted his teeth. "Lu Zhaoyi, you dare." As we spoke, another carriage approached. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I heard that familiar, sweet voice. "Thank you, eunuch." It was as if I had been nailed to the spot, and I froze completely. Xie Chonglou, standing in front of me, sensed something and frowned. "What's wrong?" I didn't answer him. I just bit my tongue and slowly turned around. Just a few steps behind me stood a woman in a purple robe with a white skirt. She was the one from my previous life, the woman Xie Chonglou wanted to marry after breaking off our engagement. As if sensing my gaze, she turned to look at me, her eyes passing over me and landing on Xie Chonglou behind me. Her expression suddenly brightened. Young General Xie, the legitimate daughter of the Xianping Marquis family, Shen Xiu. In the previous life, when Xie Chonglou brought her back, I had once watched from the door. It was a sunny spring day, the two of them riding side by side, both dressed in red. From a distance, they truly looked like a perfect pair. The servants of the general's household secretly gossiped, saying that Shen Xiu had disguised herself as a soldier and secretly joined the battlefield, saving Xie Chonglou at a critical moment. From then on, he became deeply infatuated with her. They said that Xie Chonglou met Shen Xiu while in the capital, their first encounter being a fight, but they gradually became a pair of bickering lovers. Some even said that Shen Xiu was once quiet and reserved, but after a serious illness 3 years ago, she seemed like a completely different person, often speaking in words no one could understand. However, somehow, Xie Chonglou seemed to understand everything she said, and even responded in kind. I stood there, watching Shen Xiu as she approached, ignoring me, and walked straight up to Xie Chonglou, smiling sweetly, calling out, "General Xie, long time no see." Xie Chonglou froze for a moment, looked down at her, raised an eyebrow, and said, "It's you?" A sudden heaviness settled in my heart, and I didn't want to listen anymore. I grabbed my mother's arm and turned to leave. However, as soon as I entered the main hall, Xie Chonglou caught up with me from behind. He stood there, grinning at me with a playful tilt of his lips. "Zhao Zhao, I'm standing right here. Where else are you going to find a better match?" I was so angry that I wanted to tear the handkerchief in my hands, but my upbringing prevented me from making any rude gestures. I took a deep breath and turned my gaze to Shen Xiu, who had entered behind him. "Since your beloved has already appeared, why are you still here bothering me?" I asked. Xie Chonglou seemed to be taken aback. His eyes widened as he said, "Besides you, who else have I ever considered my beloved?" Shen Xiu behind him slightly darkened her gaze, but still smiled and took her seat. After I sat down with my mother and greeted the emperor and empress, a servant of Xie Chonglou, named Xuanchen, quietly delivered a note to me. When I unfolded it, it boldly read, "If you are referring to the legitimate daughter of the Xianping Marquis family, I've only met her once. It happened at the weapon shop, where she insisted on buying a custom-made, hidden weapon from me. We ended up having a scuffle. When she realized she couldn't win, she quickly revealed her identity and accused me of bullying a woman. I was annoyed, so I gave her the item. Earlier at the palace gate, she came to thank me. So this was their first meeting." I held the note, feeling a bit disoriented. In my previous life, after I married Xie Chonglou, I asked him how he met Shen Xiu. Every time I asked, he would look at me disdainfully and sneer. You want to know? What? Are you trying to learn from a Xiu and win my favor? Miss Liu, do you think you're worthy? Later, he started bringing Shen Xiu openly in and out of the general's residence. It was the day of the first snow, and I was standing by the window, holding a hand warmer, watching as they built a strangely shaped snowman in the yard. Shen Xiu tugged at Xie Chonglou's sleeve and smiled contentedly. I didn't manage to grab an ice dundun before, but now I've made one myself. This dream has come true. I never understood their conversation. But Xie Chonglou had been smiling at Shen Xiu with tenderness, then looked up and saw me by the window, and his expression immediately turned cold. He shielded Shen Xiu with his body and sneered at me. Miss Liu, do you still have the habit of eavesdropping? Or is this the kind of upbringing of the Liu family? I had long since gotten used to such dismissive behavior, as it was something I had brought upon myself. But I couldn't tolerate him insulting my parents. So, I threw down the hand warmer, stood up with composure, and walked over. Naturally, it can't compare to the Xie family's upbringing. A marriage engagement can be broken off just like that. General Xie is a respected loyal official and general in the court, yet he shamelessly abuses his wife when he returns home. I turned my head to look at Shen Xiu and smiled mockingly. It also doesn't compare to the Xianping Marquis' family upbringing. As a legitimate daughter, she shamelessly enters the residence of a married man, secretly exchanging letters behind closed doors. Before I could finish, Xie Chonglou slapped me across the face. A married man? He stared coldly at me. Miss Liu, do you think these feudal morals can restrain us in the least? Tomorrow, I will ask the emperor to annul our marriage and marry a Xiu instead. When I snapped back from the memories of my past life, I realized that the letter in my hand had been crumpled. Xie Chonglou was sitting across from me, staring at me without blinking. The light reflected in his eyes seemed to shimmer like a river of stars. Every time he looked at me, I almost believed that he loved me deeply. But the memories of my previous life clearly told me that it was all just an illusion. I looked down again at the note, where there was one last sentence. You care so much about her. Could it be that you're jealous? I sneered, grabbed the paper and pen on the table, and wrote, General Xie, you worry too much. It's not that I care about you marrying her. I'm simply happy for you, since our engagement is broken, to see you find another match. After finishing, I had Chen Yen deliver the note back. Xie Chonglou read it, his face darkened, and he wrote in response. Liu Zhaoyi, I won't allow you to be happy. I have no relationship with that Shen woman. It has nothing to do with me. General Xie, our engagement is broken. From now on, we are nothing more than strangers. Is that so? Liu Zhaoyi, tell me, at today's palace banquet, who have you set your sights on? I'll go ask him for some advice. After all, your new match must be someone better than me, your former acquaintance. When I read this note, I suddenly looked up and met Xie Chonglou's smirking lips. Before I could reply, Chen Yen, looking distressed, said, Miss Liu, please have some understanding of my position. If you have something to say, it's better to speak with the general after the banquet. Running back and forth is exhausting, and the emperor and empress are watching us. I turned my gaze to the high seat and saw the empress watching me and Xie Chonglou with interest. She then turned to the emperor and said, Look at these two children. They came all the way here to ask for the annulment of their engagement, yet after it was broken, they're passing notes with one another under everyone's eyes. What's this, some kind of act? The emperor glanced over at Xie Chonglou with a faint smile and said, Mother, you don't understand. Perhaps it's just some playful teasing between lovers. Although he was smiling, I could still detect a faint trace of wariness in his deep, unreadable eyes. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. It seemed the emperor truly didn't want me to marry Xie Chonglou. After the third round of drinks, Shen Xiu suddenly stood up and said she had a sword dance to present to the emperor and the empress dowager. The emperor looked at her with interest and uttered a word, aloud. I have studied swordsmanship to some extent, though my abilities are limited," Shen Xiu said, smiling. As her gaze shifted, it landed on me. "I've heard that Miss Lu from the Taifu family is skilled in the guqin. I wonder if Xie could have the honor of asking you to play a piece to accompany my sword dance." The mention of Xie made my brow twitch. I was about to refuse, but before I could speak, Xie Chonglou beat me to it. "If you want to dance with a sword, the palace has its own musicians," he said, his tone pointed. "You can't just order others around as if this were your Xianping Marquis' residence." With that heavy accusation, even though Shen Xiu looked displeased, she didn't dare to retort. She shot me a resentful glance before beginning her sword dance by herself. Xie Chonglou was defending me in front of Shen Xiu? I stared at him in a daze, the memories from my past life and the present reality intertwining in my mind, a tangled mess. Shen Xiu had been practicing martial arts since childhood, so her sword dance was naturally elegant. In my previous life, Xie Chonglou had occasionally used her skill to humiliate me. But now, while everyone else in the hall was captivated by Shen Xiu's graceful movements, Xie Chonglou remained fixed on me, his gaze intense and unblinking. The emotions in his eyes were too deep and genuine, like a fiery blaze directed at me. Yet, the cold memories, like rain, threatened to drown me, pulling me apart in two. I trembled slightly, almost dropping the wine glass in my hand. Xie Chonglou furrowed his brow and suddenly stood up. Just then, Shen Xiu finished her sword dance, bowed to the emperor and the empress dowager, and looked at Xie Chonglou with a smile. But Xie Chonglou ignored her completely. He bowed slightly to the emperor, then walked toward me. In front of everyone, he leaned forward on the table. "Zhao." His clear voice reached my ears, accompanied by the warmth of his breath. "If you're feeling unwell, I'll accompany you back to the residence." Hearing this, the Empress Dowager quickly said, "Since that's the case, Chonglou should take Miss Zhao back to the Taifu residence. I've heard this child fell ill a few days ago and may not have fully recovered. Mother Gong, give my command to have Dr. Su accompany her." Everything around me became a blur, with specks of light floating around. I looked up at Xie Chonglou, biting my lip, forcing out a question. "Why? What? Why does the heart change so completely?" Somehow, the mist thickened, and I could barely make out his face. I leaned in closer, but then my body suddenly lightened. The familiar cold bamboo fragrance hit me, and I realized at once. He had picked me up. "Xie Chonglou." I trembled. "This is very rude. Hold on tight, don't speak." His voice carried a trace of defiance. "Or I might show you even ruder actions. Lu Zhaoyi, feel free to try me." I fell silent. When the doctor came to check my pulse, Xie Chonglou stayed by my side, his gaze fixed on me. "Miss Lu's high fever is likely caused by excessive worry," Dr. Su said. "I will write a prescription for several doses of medicine, and I'll come again to check your pulse later." After Dr. Su and the servant went to get the medicine, the mist around me slowly dissipated. Finally, I could clearly see Xie Chonglou's face again. A thin layer of sweat lingered on his forehead, his eyes bright as stars. But when he looked at me, his brows furrowed slightly. Excessive worry. Xie Chonglou leaned closer, supporting himself on the bed frame. "Lu Zhaoyi, what exactly is it that worries you?" His red clothing appeared before my eyes, like a blazing fire. What was I worried about? All my worries were related to him, to the strange and confusing entanglement between our past and present lives. How could I tell him that? When I didn't respond, he moved even closer, his gaze filled with earnest inquiry. "Or perhaps, the reason you're so determined to annul the engagement, what is it really?" After a long silence, I finally spoke, my voice rough. "A few days ago, I had a dream." Xie Chonglou sat down, supporting himself on the bed frame, his eyes fixed on me. What kind of dream?" "I dreamt that you fell for Shen Xiu and came personally to the Lu residence to annul our engagement. I insisted on marrying you, and the Empress Dowager even personally granted us the marriage. Later, you and Shen Xiu became a couple, while I I couldn't continue. Though those scenes existed only in my past life's memories, when they resurfaced, they still caused a dull, sharp pain in my chest. My eyelashes trembled as painful, tortured memories from those nights flashed through my mind. During my suffering, Xie Chonglou's mocking voice echoed in my ears again and again. Wasn't it your desire to marry? So desperate for a man. Isn't this exactly what you wanted? Lu Zhaoyi, you deserve this. Suddenly, a strong hand wrapped around me. I came back to my senses, realizing Xie Chonglou had pulled me into his arms, gently parting my teeth that had been biting my lip. His eyes held a fleeting trace of pain. He spoke seriously. I will never treat you like that. Zhao, it was just a dream. Don't take it seriously. The scent of him, the pressure on my head, the warmth of every inch of him touching me, it all felt so familiar. He was not the sarcastic, power-hungry official from my past life. He was the Xie Chonglou who had been by my side for 16 years. Perhaps the long, exhausting 5 years of my past life were just a dream? I was so tired, leaning against Xie Chonglou's chest, and before I realized it, I had fallen asleep. In the following days, perhaps due to the medicine Dr. Xu prescribed, my condition clearly improved. It was around this time that Xuanchen came to the Taifu residence to deliver a message saying that Xie Chonglou invited me to the martial arts arena outside the capital. You go tell him I'm not going, I replied. Xuanchen stood there with a bitter expression, cupping his hands in a pleading gesture. Miss Liu, please have a kind heart and go take a look. The young general said if you don't come, he'll deduct my salary for half a year. He had been with Xie Chonglou for 10 years and knew exactly how to speak to make me relent. I finally put down my pen, sighed softly, and said, Fine, let's go. When the carriage reached the martial arts arena, before I could even get out, a long-fingered hand lifted the curtain, revealing Xie Chonglou's exuberant face. Zhao, I knew you wanted to come watch me practice swordsmanship. I was about to step down when I heard him, and I froze. Clearly, it was you who sent Xuanchen to call me here. Well done. Xie Chonglou nodded with satisfaction at Xuanchen. I'll add 3 more months to your salary. Xuanchen immediately beamed with joy. Thank you, young general. Thank you, Miss Liu, for gracing us with your presence. I was holding up my skirt, preparing to jump down, but Xie Chonglou suddenly pulled me into his arms, lifting me effortlessly. Ah! A startled cry escaped me, and I instinctively wrapped my arms around his neck, seeing the playful smile on his face. Xie Chonglou, I called out angrily. You scoundrel! Let go of me. Instead of letting go, he tightened his hold. Lu Zhaoyi, I'm not a scoundrel. We're already betrothed. The engagement was annulled. At the mention of it, his mood clearly soured. He snorted coldly. Just wait. Next month, I'll go to the Empress Dowager and request a new imperial decree for us to be married. The scorching sunlight, the beads of sweat on his forehead, the cinnabar mole at the corner of his eye, and his fluttering red robes combined to form a vivid, almost overwhelming picture. I found myself lost for a moment, gazing into his sparkling eyes. When I snapped back to reality, I felt both embarrassed and irritated. What do you mean, remarry? Xie Chonglou, I haven't said I'll marry you yet. Lu Zhaoyi. He suddenly called my name, his tone incredibly serious. I froze for a moment, and then his handsome face leaned in, his nose almost touching mine. Give me a chance to atone for my sins. I was taken aback. Atone for what sins? To atone for the Xie Chonglou you saw in your dream. He still held me, his gaze hotter than the sun. I need you to know, the days after marrying me will not be like that. Xie Chonglou led me into the martial arts arena, and his soldiers who tried to gather around were all driven away by him. Sit here. I'll practice a set of sword techniques for you, he said. Last spring, Xie Chonglou led his first battle, and with a surprise attack using only 3,000 men, he defeated a northern Chong army of nearly 10,000. When the news reached the capital, the emperor was overjoyed and immediately promoted him to a second-rank general. Even in a city as full of talented individuals as the capital, He stood out as the most remarkable of the younger generation of noble sons. After Xie Chonglou was promoted to general, I attended gatherings with the noble ladies of the capital, and occasionally people would bring up my engagement to him. Young General Xie is so handsome and so young, yet so accomplished on the battlefield. There's no better husband in the entire city. Of course, I knew how exceptional he was in every way. But I was Lu Zhaoyi, and I was never lacking. As a child, I learned to read faster than my two older brothers. By 7, I had finished the Confucian classics and could write simple essays. Later, as I grew older, Xie Chonglou would sometimes call me over while practicing swordplay and secretly teach me a few moves. "I know the noble ladies in the capital don't practice this," he said, wiping the sweat from his forehead, raising an eyebrow with a smile. "But you are Lu Zhaoyi, you're always different from them." The sound of the sword cutting through the air filled the arena. I focused intently and soon realized that the set of sword techniques he was practicing was the same one he had taught me secretly when I was 12. Back then, I had been injured due to my lack of skill, and he had later secretly taught it to me. But now, the movements were smoother and sharper, each strike carrying a fierce killing intent that was unmistakable. After finishing, he sheathed his sword and walked towards me. As he neared, I opened my mouth to speak, but suddenly, a familiar voice interrupted. "Young General Xie." It was Shen Xiu. She was wearing a fiery red outfit and carrying a long sword, and the ensemble matched Xie Chonglou's attire. However, when Xie Chonglou saw her, his expression turned cold. "How dare you enter my martial arts arena? Guard, escort her out." "Young General Xie may not know, but I am here by the Emperor's order," Shen Xiu replied. "Oh," Xie Chonglou said expressionlessly. "In that case, there are plenty of other martial arts arenas in the capital outskirts. You can choose any of them. I don't welcome you here." His refusal was blunt and unkind, causing Shen Xiu to freeze, her smile almost fading entirely. "Young General Xie, do you think a woman like me is not worthy to stay in your martial arts arena? Even the Emperor?" Xie Chonglou impatiently ignored her, walking straight over to me. "No matter how much you argue, my arena doesn't allow women. If you're dissatisfied, go to the Emperor and report me." Shen Xiu shot me a sidelong glance and suddenly said, "Young General Xie, if your arena doesn't allow women, then why is Miss Lu allowed in? Isn't this double standards?" Xie Chonglou's face darkened. "Stop talking. Since you want to come in so badly, don't think those few ornamental moves will impress me. Come on, if you can last 10 moves without being defeated by me, I'll consider it." Though I hadn't trained much in martial arts, I could tell Shen Xiu lacked internal energy. Her moves were weak and empty, her sword dance at the banquet just a few ornamental flourishes. It had been the same in my past life, but back then, Xie Chonglou treated her like a treasure, even occasionally mocking me with her martial skills. Miss Lu, who has been sheltered in her boudoir, has no idea how captivating women of the martial world are. He seemed to have completely forgotten that it was he who had taught me both swordplay and horsemanship. Now, under Xie Chonglou's ruthless attacks, Shen Xiu had no power to resist. In just 2 moves, he had her arms twisted behind her back, pinned firmly to the ground. Shen Xiu, enraged and humiliated, raised her head and said, "Young General Xie, are you really going to treat a woman like this? Don't you have any sympathy for a lady?" Xie Chonglou scoffed. "You yourself said in front of the Emperor that you're not like those delicate noble ladies. Have you forgotten your own words? Are you going to battle, hoping the Northern Chong will show you the same compassion?" Shen Xiu bit her lip, looking pitiful as she tilted her head back and softly murmured something. In that moment, an odd sense of unease surged in my heart, and I instinctively stepped forward. Then, I heard Xie Chonglou's voice, full of pride, as he spoke to Shen Xiu. "I, Xie Chonglou, will win back my true love openly and honestly. I don't need your so-called provocations. You really overestimate yourself, Miss Shen." On the way back from the martial arts arena, Xie Chonglou accompanied me. Before we left, I lifted the carriage curtain and glanced out. Shen Xiu was standing at the door, holding her sword and looking at me with a strange expression. I couldn't describe her gaze, only that it carried a mix of contempt, tinged with a sense of distant, condescending pity. As I felt uneasy, Xie Chonglou reached out and held my hand, raising an eyebrow. Zhao, don't pay attention to people who aren't important. For some reason, in this lifetime, he seemed completely uninterested in Shen Xiu, which was a stark contrast to the way he had gone to great lengths to defend her in front of me in my past life. Perhaps the 5 years of torment in my past life had left such a deep mark that, even though reality wasn't the same and Xie Chonglou himself said it was just a dream, I still couldn't shake my unease. I didn't know how to face Xie Chonglou, so I silently moved away from him. His eyes darkened as he said, somewhat bitterly, "Lu Zhaoyi, are you really going to push me away because of that fleeting dream?" When we returned to the estate, my mother noticed that I was in a bad mood and suggested we go to the Jinling temple on the outskirts of the city for a prayer in 3 days. But somehow word got out, and on that day, I ran into Xie Chonglou again at the entrance of the temple. Turning my head, I saw my mother watching me. Zhao, I'll go with the Taisher's wife to the side room for some vegetarian food. If you finish your conversation, just come find me. The strange atmosphere between Xie Chonglou and me must have been obvious to her, so she had come up with this solution. Xie Chonglou approached and greeted my mother politely.
Please don't worry, Aunt.
I will take good care of Zhao. Once my mother left, he took out a purple jade hairpin from his pocket and handed it to me. It's late autumn now, and spring camellias are hard to find, so I carved this for you. I looked down at it. Did you carve this yourself? Yes, Xie Chonglou replied, clearing his throat. I know you've learned some jade and gold carving techniques, so feel free to critique it honestly. Since he said so, I examined it carefully and then honestly said, the carving is rough, the cuts are too heavy, and the high-quality spring jade material, it's not well used. Lu Zhaoyi. Before I could finish, Xie Chonglou glared at me, emphasizing, I searched the entire capital for this material and spent all night carving it. But the sentiment is rare, and upon closer inspection, the spring camellia seems vivid and lifelike, truly a gem among ordinary things, I quickly added, trying to soften my words. Xie Chonglou seemed pleased, reaching out and pinning the hairpin into my hair. Since you like it so much, I'll put it on you now. His warm fingers brushed against my temple and gently traced over my ear. The sensation felt like a feather landing on my heart, causing a tickling warmth. I suddenly felt my face flush and heat rise. As we spoke, we had already crossed through the pear blossom grove in the temple's courtyard and reached the back hall. The light before us suddenly softened, and the faint scent of sandalwood in the air calmed my uneasy heart. After we sat down in front of Master Xuanchen, I respectfully saluted, and soon I heard his voice. Donor, your heart is full of doubts, yet you don't know how to resolve them, which is why you are troubled day and night. He clasped his hands together and lowered his head slightly. In the chaos of the world, the heart is precious. You may follow your heart, and the situation will resolve itself. But I've followed my heart before, and it led me into a trap, forcing me to a dead end. Do you know, Donor, that you've already reached a dead end, yet you are still here? Master Xuanchen slowly opened his eyes. His gaze was kind but calm. Human hearts are easily changed, but they are also the hardest to change. This situation is different from before. You must go through the worst before you can emerge, and only then will the clouds part and the moon shine through. I thanked Master Xuanchen and left, and Xie Chonglou was waiting for me outside. What did the old monk say to you? He told me to follow my heart. Seeing his expression wasn't good, I couldn't help but ask, and what did he say to you? Are you upset? Xie Chonglou narrowed his eyes and said arrogantly, he told me not to be so obsessed, that some things are fated to be, and some are not. And then I gave him a piece of my mind and told him that it's my heart that decides such things, not fate or destiny. It was exactly something Xie Chonglou would do. He never believed in gods or monks. I sighed lightly. Maybe he's right. You're too obsessed. Taking a step back isn't a bad thing. Before I could finish, Xie Chonglou grabbed my wrist and pressed me against the pillar of a pavilion. His eyes glinted with an unfathomable emotion. Take a step back, Lu Zhaoyi. I've been hoping to marry you since I was 12. Now you want me to take a step back and give up for no reason? I told you, it's just a dream. I haven't done anything, but you've sentenced me to death because of a dream. Have you ever considered if that's fair to me? By the end of his words, his eyes had reddened slightly, and there was a tremor in his voice. The pain in my chest surged again, and I opened my mouth, but found I could hardly make a sound. How could I not know? This kind of cold treatment wasn't fair to Xie Chonglou, who knew nothing. But it wasn't just a dream. It was 5 years I had lived through. Over 1,000 days and nights, like a dull blade cutting away the warmth I had held in my heart for 16 years. That kind of raw, bloody pain still haunted me when I thought about it. I took a deep breath, raised my eyes to meet his, and slowly said, "What if it wasn't just a dream?" His expression suddenly stiffened. But in the briefest moment, I lost all strength and helplessly rubbed my forehead. Never mind, just pretend I'm talking nonsense. The atmosphere grew quiet for a moment, and all that passed through our ears was the sound of the wind. Besides us and Shen Xiu, who else was in your dream? Xie Chonglou suddenly asked. If I really wanted to break off our engagement, my parents would be the first to disagree. What about the ones in your dream? Uncle Xie and Aunt Xie passed away less than a year after I married into the family. Before they passed, Aunt Xie had held my hand and softly said, Zhao, don't be too sad. For some reason, I've always felt that ever since the day you proposed the annulment, Chonglou hasn't been the same child to me. Now that I'm going, just think of him as going with me. I told Xie Chonglou about all this from my past life. After listening, he was silent for a moment before telling me with certainty. My mother was right. Zhao, even if I hurt myself, I couldn't bear to hurt you in the slightest, and I would never do something like that. Unless the person in your dream wasn't Xie Chonglou at all. After saying this, he lowered his head to look into my eyes, then pinched my chin and kissed me. The kiss was gentle yet passionate, something I never received from Xie Chonglou during our 5 years of marriage in my past life. I clung to his clothes, my voice trembling. Xie Chonglou, this is a sacred place of the Buddha. I don't believe in gods or Buddha, and I don't believe in fate, he replied. Pulling back a little, he still stood very close, gazing intently at me. But I believe that intentions cannot be changed. I believe that man can overcome fate. And I believe, if you don't let go of me, that dream, no matter what, will never come true. Later, as light rain began to fall in the mountains, he accompanied me to the guest room to meet my mother, then declined her invitation, walking down the mountain without an umbrella. After a few steps, Xie Chonglou suddenly stopped and turned to look at me. There's turmoil in the southwest. The emperor has ordered me to lead the troops to quell the unrest. Zhao, I'll go earn a title for you. When I return, I'll ask for a new engagement. Is that all right? His voice strangely echoed the promise he made 4 years ago, when he knelt in the snow. I couldn't help the fluttering in my heart and nodded vigorously, leaning against the corridor as I solemnly replied, all right. But through the rain curtain, in the blur, I could never quite make out the look in Xie Chonglou's eyes. Less than half a month after he left, reports from the southwest came pouring in. My father would bring back news each time he returned from court. For example, he was ambushed and, at a critical moment, was saved by a small soldier who was then promoted to deputy general. Those few words alone were enough to stir the heart. I held the carving knife, carefully etching the long hairpin in my hand, hoping to give it to Xie Chonglou when he returned in triumph. Days passed like water, and I thought perhaps everything from my past life was just a grand dream, and that my marriage to Xie Chonglou would proceed smoothly, just as I had imagined countless times before. Just then, my father told me he was preparing to return to court. It was the beginning of winter, and delicate snowflakes were falling in the capital. I wore a bright red cape with white fur trim and the spring camellia hairpin that Xie Chonglou gave me in my hair, waiting outside the city gate for him. Zhaoyi tried to persuade me to wait in the carriage, but I shook my head. It's not too cold. I'll wait outside. Near noon, the sound of soldiers' hooves grew louder, and for some reason, I suddenly remembered. In my past life, it seemed like it was the very day Xie Chonglou came to the Taifu's residence to call off our engagement. The next moment, at the front of the troop, a sleek black horse with 4 hooves stamping through the snow came galloping toward us, carrying 2 people. The horse's hooves kicked up small flakes of snow. For a moment, it felt as if I had fallen into an icy pit. In front, sitting in a blue dress with a sword at her waist, was the spirited Shen Xiu. Behind her, tightly wrapped in a cloak, was the young Xie Chonglou, his eyes cold and indifferent, sweeping over me with a glance. The horse suddenly stopped in front of me, raising its front hooves high. I didn't dodge. I just stared steadily at Xie Chonglou. Not seeing panic or sorrow on my face, he seemed a little surprised, raising an eyebrow at me. "Miss Liu, who are you waiting for?" "Naturally, I'm waiting for you." Before Xie Chonglou could respond, Shen Xiu in front of him let out a soft laugh, leaned back, and made a friendly gesture. "Since Miss Liu has broken off the engagement with General Xie, there is no connection between you two anymore. You should go find your perfect match. Why come back to entangle yourself with an old love?" There was an unmistakable pride in her eyes. I tightened my cloak and calmly replied, "This is between me and Xie Chonglou. It has nothing to do with you." "Of course, it has something to do with me. I saved his life on the battlefield in the southwest, and now General Xie intends to repay me by offering himself in return for this life-saving grace." In the memories of my past life, this was supposed to happen a year later, but now it was happening far earlier. Something flashed through my mind, but it was too quick to catch. "Is that how you see it, Xie Chonglou?" I stopped looking at Shen Xiu and focused my gaze on Xie Chonglou. He glanced at Shen Xiu, his eyes filled with tenderness. Xiu's intentions are naturally my intentions. Besides, Miss Liu, you were the one who proposed the annulment. Now that it's come to pass, why are you upset? Do you really think you're some kind of fairy and everyone should wait for you? The sarcasm in his words was heavy, almost identical to the Xie Chonglou of my past life. But what exactly had happened? Everything had seemed fine before he went to the southwest. I instinctively raised my hand to adjust the spring camellia hairpin in my hair and looked up at him. "You said you were going to the southwest to earn a title for me. When you returned, you'd ask the Empress Dowager to grant us a new engagement. You also said your feelings would never change, and as long as I didn't let go, you wouldn't give up on me." Xie Chonglou's eyes flashed with a hint of anger. "I'm having second thoughts. I don't like you anymore. Is that all right?" "Lu Zhaoyi." Shen Xiu spoke again, her gaze mixed with disdain and pity as she looked at me and said in a cold tone, "You are, after all, a well-born young lady. You should leave yourself some dignity. Why cling to someone who has no interest in you?" "Cling?" I tugged the corners of my lips and slowly smiled. The Xianping Marquis family clearly has strict family teachings, but Miss Shen seems to have forgotten that, as a lady, you rode with General Xie in front of everyone. Isn't that even more inappropriate? If you want to lecture me, maybe you should set a good example first. Shen Xiu's expression froze, and she instinctively turned her head to glance behind her. Xie Chonglou coldly scolded me. "Do you really think Xiu is like one of those delicate, sheltered flowers from your boudoir? Miss Liu, I need to return to the palace to report, and our fates are finished. Don't come bothering me again." After speaking, he no longer looked at me and rode off with Shen Xiu. Zhaoyi rushed over and grabbed my hand, her voice trembling with tears. "Miss." I looked down and realized my nails had dug into my palm, and my hand was covered in blood. Even the white jade hairpin I had been gripping was stained a deep red. "Miss, please get into the carriage and return to the Taifu residence." She urged me with trembling lips. "Your health is still recovering. You mustn't catch another chill." The world before me was a blur of white. I wasn't sure if it was from staring at the snow for too long, but I let her persuade me into the carriage. Inside, a charcoal stove warmed the air, and I slowly started to feel my body again. Suddenly, I spoke. "That wasn't Xie Chonglou." Zhaoyi tried to comfort me as if I were a child. If you say it wasn't, then it wasn't. General Xie treated you this way, and the general's residence will have to give us an explanation. I knew she didn't believe me. But this wasn't just self-consolation. I didn't believe that was Xie Chonglou. That day at Jinling Temple, he kissed me and said he didn't believe in fate or destiny. But just now, the person on the horse had told me, our fate has ended. He wasn't Xie Chonglou. He couldn't be Xie Chonglou. I hadn't thought this way in my past life, but now I was living another life. Perhaps some strange and supernatural events weren't just myths after all. With this absurd and bold thought, I forced myself to return to the Taifu residence and threw myself into the vast sea of books in the study. From time to time, news would trickle into the residence. It was said that when Xie Chonglou entered the palace to thank the emperor, he brought Shen Xiu with him and even tried to have the emperor grant them a marriage. When they drafted the decree, however, the Empress Dowager stopped them, saying that Xie Chonglou had only recently broken off his engagement with me, so it was better to wait for now. Afterwards, the Xianping Marquis's residence sent someone to personally escort Shen Xiu back. It's said that Miss Shen is the daughter of the late Marquis of Xuanping's wife. Though she's the legitimate daughter, after the Marquis remarried, her life hasn't been easy. She continued talking, then looked at the thick stack of books beside me. Miss, what exactly are you looking for? I pressed down on the pages in my hands, staring blankly for a moment before finally replying, a way to break the spell. There were many stories in the historical records of strange and supernatural events, but none seemed to resemble what was happening with Xie Chonglou. It felt as if a massive fog was clouding my mind, leaving me stumbling in the dark. In my moment of desperation, I suddenly thought of someone. Master Xuanchen. Before I could even reach Jinling Temple, Uncle Xie and Aunt Xie had already arrived with Xie Chonglou. Aunt Xie had a close friendship with my mother and, when talking about the broken engagement, refused to blame me. Instead, she placed the blame on Xie Chonglou. I've only recognized Zhao as my daughter-in-law in this life. No one with ill intentions will marry into this family. Xie Chonglou's face darkened. Mother, the engagement with Lu Zhaoyi has been broken. So what? Aunt Xie shot him a cold glance. Even if you can't marry Zhao, you won't marry that girl, Shen Xiu from the Xianping Marquis household. Uncle Xie also looked serious. You behaved impulsively outside the city gate. You should apologize to Zhaoyi. Reluctantly, Xie Chonglou was forced to come over, bowing to me to apologize, though his face was full of unwillingness, as if insulted. As he turned his head, his gaze fell on Uncle Xie and Aunt Xie, and I saw a flash of intense, murderous intent in his eyes. I gripped my teacup, suddenly freezing in place, a storm of emotions surging within me. In my past life, Uncle Xie and Aunt Xie had died suddenly, and this memory resurfaced in my mind. Uncle Xie had practiced martial arts for decades, and Aunt Xie was always healthy. How could they suddenly fall ill? Some days ago, outside the city gate, I acted impulsively and offended Miss Lu. Xie Chonglou bowed to me, and when he straightened up, a fleeting sneer appeared at the corner of his lips. However, our engagement is broken now, and I already have someone I care about. We will have no further interactions in the future. I lower my gaze. I never thought of marrying you. Oh, then that's even better. Before he could finish, I raised my head and looked directly at him, speaking slowly. The person I want to marry is Xie Chonglou. It was the boy who had promised me in the snow, the one who secretly taught me swordsmanship, the one who carved the hairpin for me, kissed me under the pear tree, Xie Chonglou. Not the person in front of me. He stared at me, his emotions complex, a trace of hostility passing through his expression, but in the end, it all faded into cold mockery. He said, "But I am Xie Chonglou." After the people from the general's residence left, my mother hesitated before looking at me. I calmly said, "I want to go to Jinling Temple again." Zhao, try to understand. Her tone was cautious, as if afraid I would be heartbroken. If this marriage doesn't work out, your father and I will find another match for you. Your brother will be back in the capital by the end of the month, and he can take you. In my past life, she had said the same things to me. But I had been so sincere, falling deeply for Xie Chonglou since I was 12, and I refused to accept it. So, I went to the palace and begged the Empress Dowager, asking for a decree to marry Xie Chonglou. Even so, my mother had never been angry with me. She would often visit and kindly ask Xie Chonglou to treat me better. But Xie Chonglou's response was always indifferent. Since she's married into the family, she is naturally a part of the Xie family. If Mrs. Liu is dissatisfied, I can write a letter of divorce, and you can take her back. Later, when the Liu family fell from power, my mother barely stepped into the Xie family residence anymore. The difficulties of my past life were my own choice. I bore the consequences and couldn't blame anyone else. But now, living another life, seeing Xie Chonglou's deep affection for me, all the old memories came rushing back. It was like a thread of grass, and when I looked back at my past life, I suddenly realized there were too many things that didn't make sense. I made up my mind to go to Jinling Temple again to see Master Xuanchen. However, the snow in the capital had been falling for several days, and by the time I reached Jinling Temple, the snow had blocked the roads, and all the carriages were stopped at the base of the mountain. A little monk stood at the foot of the mountain, hands pressed together in a gesture of prayer. The snow is too heavy. Perhaps you should wait until the snow melts before coming again. Zhaoyi tried to persuade me. Miss, why don't you return to the residence and come another day? Since we're here, I don't want to return empty-handed. But the snow is blocking the mountain. The carriage can't go up. I shook my head, tightened my cloak, and stepped off the carriage. You stay at the foot of the mountain. I'll go up myself. The snow covered the mountain, silent, with no sound. The snow reached up to my knees, and it seeped into my rabbit fur boots, wet and cold. I gritted my teeth, step by step, climbing higher. The sharp, icy pain pierced through me, but my obsession urged me on. I had to reach the top to find an answer. If that person really was Xie Chonglou, I would let go of my obsession from now on. If he wasn't, no matter life or death, I had to find the real Xie Chonglou. When I finally reached the back hall of Jinling Temple, the sky was already growing dark. Before I could knock on the door, it slowly opened. Inside, the furnishings were extremely simple, with a small lamp burning on the table. Master Xuanchen sat in front of the table with his eyes closed, seemingly in meditation. I calmed myself and walked over, respectfully bowing. I apologize for the disturbance, Master. The person with doubts comes to seek answers. It is no disturbance. Master Xuanchen gestured for me to sit. The fragrant sandalwood smoke rose, and my heart gradually settled. I came to ask Master if there is any way to make a person change into another person, aside from their appearance. Are you referring to Xie Chonglou? A spark of hope ignited in my heart, and I couldn't help but sit up straighter, staring at him.
Yes.
Master, do you know where he is now? After a moment of silence, Master Xuanchen slowly opened his eyes. His gaze was deep and compassionate, as though the entire world and everything in it was both within his sight and beyond it. Bound by his body, his eyes can see, his ears can hear, but his mouth cannot speak. The door to the main hall opened without my noticing, and the cold wind carrying snowflakes blew in through the gaps, as if striking directly into my heart. Even though I was wrapped in a thick cloak, I felt as if I had fallen into an ice cave, my whole body trembling. Xie Chonglou. If that were true, if the person from my past life wasn't him, then did he see and hear everything that happened in my past life, but couldn't speak? I couldn't think any further. I bit my lip to calm myself. Master, do you know if there's a way for me to at least see him once? Master Xuanchen was silent for a long while, then spoke softly. For Xie Chonglou, perhaps obsession can break all things. It's likely that the snow on the way up and down the mountain got me soaked, because after returning, I fell ill for several days. Just in time for the new year, my brother returned to the capital. Upon hearing about everything that had happened these past few days, he was furious and wanted to go to the Xie family to demand justice from Xie Chonglou, but I stopped him. He's not Xie Chonglou. I leaned back against the headboard, my lips pale, but my tone was firm and resolute. My brother thought I was just making excuses for him and, not wanting to scold me, walked around the room in frustration. How could a girl from the Liu family be treated like this? Zhao, we're not marrying him anymore. I'll find someone better for you and make Xie Chonglou regret it. I couldn't help but laugh at his words, chuckling a couple of times before coughing again. You don't need to worry, brother. I know what I'm doing. On New Year's Eve, there was a banquet at the palace. After carefully dressing, I entered the palace with my mother. It had only been 3 months, but the Xie Chonglou, who had once held me in his arms in front of the entire hall, now didn't even look at me. He was entirely focused on talking to Shen Xiu, speaking to her with affectionate familiarity. When Shen Xiu looked up and saw me sitting across from her, the corner of her lips curled into a provocative smile. I raised my wine glass towards her from afar. The outcome is still undecided, so there's no need for her to be so smug. After the start of spring, I began visiting the general's residence every day. Xie Bofu and Xie Bomu welcomed me warmly, but Xie Chonglou would turn cold the moment he saw me and even mock me a few times. Shameless. I gazed at him calmly and smiled faintly. Naturally, I can't compare to Miss Shen Xiu, who is so bold and generous. He sneered. Is the Liu family's upbringing all about being sarcastic? Didn't you study at the Liu family school in the past? I retorted. If so, the Liu family's education must have also raised you, right? Xie Chonglou, are you now denying even yourself? I slightly lifted my head as I spoke, drawing closer to Xie Chonglou. When he heard this, a flash of amusement passed through his cold, disdainful gaze. Though it was just for a brief moment, the familiar feeling made my heart race. The next day, when I visited the general's residence again, Xie Chonglou wasn't home. Xie Bomu said he had gone to the training grounds outside the capital. When I arrived, I found that Shen Xiu was there too. Perhaps she had just finished sword practice, as she was standing very close to Xie Chonglou, using a sleeve to wipe the sweat off her forehead, talking to him with a bright smile. I walked over and lowered my gaze slightly. Xie Chonglou. The pair, who had been so affectionate, suddenly froze. Xie Chonglou frowned when he saw me. Who allowed you to come in? Guan, Vice General? Vice General Guan hurried over and said cautiously, General, it was you who said that if Miss Liu came to see you, there's no need to announce it. Just let her in directly. That was before. Xie Chonglou said coldly, from now on, no one is to let her in. Vice General Guan showed a confused expression, as if wondering whether Xie Chonglou was okay, but still respectfully nodded and walked over to politely ask me to leave. I unsheathed the sword at his waist and deftly performed a flourish in the air, pointing the blade forward. Xie Chonglou, let's have a match. He was stunned for a moment, and then, after coming to his senses, he laughed in disbelief. Miss Liu, are you thinking that because Miss Xiu can fight on the battlefield, you can do the same now? Whether I can or not, you'll know if you try. I tilted my chin at him and stepped up onto the training platform first. Xie Chonglou slowly drew his sword and said calmly, Blades have no eyes, Miss Liu. The training grounds are not like your Liu family's warm bed. If it comes to life or death, don't blame me. He used the same sword technique that he had practiced countless times before, but his movements were stiff and awkward, completely unlike the smooth and flowing style I had seen when he had used it in front of me before. And this was the same set of sword techniques that Xie Chonglou had personally taught me, step by step in the past. The cold spring wind cut through the air as the sword sliced through it, heading straight for Xie Chonglou. During the countless moments of blade contact, I couldn't help but think back to the past. Xie Chonglou had held my wrist, almost pulling me into his embrace as he carefully taught me, his warmth radiating through the thin fabric. My thoughts scattered as I was distracted by the hand he had held, and Xie Chonglou had smirked, his voice laced with a smile. Zhao, what are you thinking about? Nothing. I forced myself to calm down, but he leaned down, his lips almost touching my ear. Focus on the sword, everything else can wait until after we're married. I snapped back to focus and began to strike fiercely. Xie Chonglou retreated, his eyes showing surprise and anger, but gradually, there was an edge of malice in them. In one misstep, he reached out, but I grabbed his wrist and pinned it to the ground with all my strength. I drew out the dagger that Xie Chonglou had once given me and aimed it at his eye. Lu Zhaoyi. He cried out in fear, his voice hoarse and ragged. In that instant, his eyes flashed, and something familiar, something that had appeared in my dreams countless times, flickered in his gaze. The dagger stopped just inches from his eye. I trembled twice before feeling a force grip my wrist, gentle but firm. That voice, the voice that had once captured my heart, called out once more, "Ah Zhao Zhao." Even though it was the same person, the same body, and the same voice, I could strangely sense the difference. I opened my mouth to call his name, but my throat felt as if it was blocked by something, and I couldn't say a word. Instead, my vision blurred with tears, and I suddenly lost all my strength. The sun hung high in the sky, and the spring air began to stir. I bit my lip tightly, feeling his hand slowly move upward, gently touching the spring camellia hairpin in my hair. "Good girl," he whispered. "Spring has arrived, and this year's spring camellia will bloom soon." After saying this, he gently closed his eyes and passed out. I slowly regained my composure, using my long sword to support myself as I stood up. My gaze swept across the training ground. Vice Commander Guan hurriedly called for people to come up and lift Xie Chonglou into the Xie family's carriage outside the training ground. I steadied myself and was about to follow when suddenly someone appeared in front of me and blocked my way. It was Shen Xiu. Her eyes, once filled with lofty pity, now glared at me with anger and hatred. "What did you do to him?" "What?" I asked, confused. "Xie Chonglou." She stared at me intently, her voice harsh. "What methods did you use on him? What did you do?" I tugged at the corner of my lips. "Miss Shen, I should be asking you that question. Whether that person is Xie Chonglou, you should know better than I." "And my question?" She froze. "No, impossible. How do you know? You are only what?" She didn't finish, and I furrowed my brow, continuing, "I've known Xie Chonglou for 16 years. We grew up together and we share a bond. How could I not notice the changes in him? Childhood sweethearts." She spat through clenched teeth, and a clear hatred filled her gaze. "Lu Zhaoyi, people like you, with a good family background, doting parents, and a perfect childhood sweetheart who loves you deeply. Why? Why do you get everything so easily without having to do anything? Do you know the life I've led? Though I'm the legitimate daughter, my stepmother's mistreatment makes me no better than the lowest servant she keeps by her side. From the moment Xie Chonglou sent me the hidden weapon, he became the only light in my life. You already have everything, so why take him from me?" A strange obsession flickered on her face. I knew the hidden weapon wasn't something Xie Chonglou had meant to give her, but I had no intention of clarifying. I simply turned and left the training ground, riding toward the general's residence. Xie Chonglou remained unconscious for 2 full days. Other than me, Shen Xiu also stayed at the general's residence, probably waiting for some kind of result. Xie Chonglou woke up at dusk 2 days later. The evening sky was heavy with dark clouds, and it seemed a storm was coming. He slowly opened his eyes as he lay on the bed. I fixed my gaze on him until I met a cold, sinister look in his eyes. My heart dropped as if falling into an abyss. Shen Xiu screamed and joyfully rushed to him. He raised a hand to embrace Shen Xiu, then looked at me with mockery, saying, "Miss Lu, what a pity. Your childhood sweetheart is probably never coming back." Before the overwhelming panic took over me, I bit my lip hard and forced myself to calm down. "Is that so? If he never returns, what are you afraid of?" When I saw a hint of anger in his expression, my heart relaxed. "You're smart, daring to gamble with life and death, hoping I'll release him." After a long pause, he finally spoke slowly. "But some things are already set by fate. No matter how powerful Xie Chonglou is, he's nothing but a character in a predetermined story. You have no chance of winning." His tone was full of arrogance, and the look he gave me was one of disdain and casual mockery. Xie Chonglou had a striking face, and such a look on his features seemed completely out of place, but he seemed unaware. On the other hand, Shen Xiu, who was leaning against his chest, stiffened slightly. In that moment, a strange thought flashed through my mind. It seemed, although Shen Xiu was very close to the strange soul inhabiting Xie Chonglou's body, the person she truly cared for was the real Xie Chonglou. After returning to the Taifu residence that night, I had a strange dream. In the dream, Xie Chonglou and I were characters in a story. I was the legitimate daughter of the Taifu, and he was a young general. We were childhood sweethearts, and when I turned 16, we married. However, after marriage, because my brother made political achievements and Xie Chonglou earned military honors, the Liu and Xie families became powerful, drawing the suspicion of the emperor, who thought the Xie family harbored rebellious intentions and nearly faced destruction. In this critical moment, Shen Xiu stepped forward, sacrificing her life to buy some time for the Xie family. The reason she did this was simply because, as a young girl, she had once seen Xie Chonglou pass by on horseback and instantly fell in love with him. But in the dream, Shen Xiu's character was silent and timid. Though she was mistreated by her biological mother, she didn't have the courage to resist and allowed herself to be married to the elderly Ziyuan Marquis as his concubine. The only brave thing she did in her life was for the Xie family, for Xie Chonglou. The dream scenes flashed past like a fleeting shadow, and in the end, I slowly opened my eyes as dawn broke. I propped my forehead and slowly sat up, still not fully awake from the dream. Yesterday, the strange soul in Xie Chonglou's body kept saying that Xie Chonglou was a character whose fate couldn't be changed. If that's true, then he and Shen Xiu must be the readers of the book, right? Now, Shen Xiu's personality was so different from what I had dreamed. Could it be that, like Xie Chonglou, she was also possessed by a strange soul? I had never believed in such absurd things before. Even in my past life, when Xie Chonglou's feelings changed and everything around us turned upside down, I never thought of this. But now, having experienced the bizarre reality of living again, bold thoughts began to surface, and I was gradually verifying them step by step. During breakfast, my mother looked like she wanted to say something but stopped, her eyes filled with worry. "It's going to rain heavily today. Will you still go to the general's residence?" Of course. I would go to the general's residence every day, appearing before the strange soul and Shen Xiu, even if I couldn't bring back Xie Chonglou for the moment. I would make them uneasy, unable to eat or sleep. Because if Xie Chonglou of this life hadn't disappeared but was trapped inside his body, then in the past life, it must have been the same. So in the past, when he was trapped in his own body, watching his parents being harmed, seeing me being humiliated, the pride and honor of the Xie family slowly collapse, unable to do anything, what kind of feelings would he have had? I drank the almond milk from the celadone bowl in one gulp and asked Zhaoyi to call someone to prepare the carriage. Suddenly, a hand reached out from the side, holding a 16-rib oil paper umbrella with slender fingers. The voice, though tinged with the sound of rain, remained as cold and stern as ever. "I will go with you." It was my brother. At first, I didn't understand his meaning. It wasn't until that day when the heavy rain that had been pouring down on the capital for several days finally stopped that I decided to go to the jewelry shop to pick out something. I overheard some people gossiping. I heard that after Miss Liu Zhaoyi took the initiative to break off the engagement, General Xie made another military achievement. She regrets it now. But General Xie has already shifted his affection to Miss Shen Xiu, and she has no choice but to cling to him, chasing him every day to the general's residence, but she can't be driven away. Liu Taifu has lived a life of integrity, but in the end, his daughter has ruined his reputation. Isn't that right? A young lady who hasn't even left the house is chasing after a man like this. I'm afraid she'll soon be undressing and offering herself to him. I froze, holding the jade in my hand. My brother quickly reached out and covered my ears. "Zhao, don't listen." His deep eyes were filled with concern. "I want to listen." I took a slow breath, removed his hand, and smiled faintly. Brother, I'll remember every word of this. After all, compared to the humiliation and neglect in my past life, what did a few idle words from others matter? At that time, I still didn't understand why the person I thought was my lover had already stopped being the Xie Chonglou I knew since childhood. I couldn't fathom why he had changed his heart or why he treated me so dismissively and humiliated me to that extent. Now, bit by bit, the truth was slowly unraveling before me. I even retrieved scattered fragments of memories from my past life, and together, they formed the deeper feelings I had for Xie Chonglou after his rebirth, along with the increasingly clear determination in my heart. I am Lu Zhaoyi. I will never admit defeat to anyone, not even to the two unknown souls. The weather was fine, and after leaving the jewelry shop, perhaps to cheer me up, my brother suggested, I heard that the spring begonia flowers at Full Moon Hill are in bloom. Today is your birthday, Zhao. Let me take you to see the flowers. I froze for a moment, then suddenly realized. Yes, today is March 6th, my birthday. These past days, I had been so focused on dealing with those two unfamiliar souls that I had completely forgotten about my own birthday. In the past, every year on my birthday, Xie Chonglou would carefully prepare a gift for me and personally deliver it to the Taifu residence. One year, he gave me a chrysoprase bracelet, which my brother had already gifted me. The young man raised his eyebrows, took me out, and we visited half the jewelry shops in the capital, but still didn't find the best one. In the end, he took me on horseback to Full Moon Hill to see the spring begonias, which were the most beautiful at the start of spring. I've already ordered branches from Full Moon Hill to be grafted back. In 3 years, when you marry into the general's residence, you'll be able to see a courtyard full of spring begonias. Coming back to my senses, the carriage suddenly stopped halfway. My brother's colleague had come to find him to discuss important matters in the court. He hesitated and looked back at me. I understood immediately. Brother, go ahead with your work. It's just flowers. I can go by myself. All right, then return home early. Father and mother have also prepared a celebration for your birthday. After parting ways with my brother, the carriage continued to Full Moon Hill. The entire mountain was covered with spring begonias that had just sprouted new buds, but none of the trees had flowers yet. I instructed the driver to wait outside and jumped out of the carriage, holding up my skirt and walking into the begonia grove. After walking for some distance, the view before me suddenly opened up. From the fresh green, it shifted to a bright and lively scene with shades of pink and white. I stood there in a daze for a moment, but then I heard a familiar voice behind me, still carrying a hint of weariness, but unmistakably cheerful. Zhao. I turned around, and there he was, Xie Chonglou, dressed in red, his arms crossed over a sword, leaning against a tree, smiling at me. The breeze gently blew, causing his fine hair at the forehead to move slightly, highlighting the vermilion mole at the corner of his eye, making it even more striking. For a moment, I almost thought it was an illusion. But when he stepped forward and wrapped me in his arms, the warmth of his body and the clear fragrance of him enveloped me. I suddenly realized this was real. Before I could react, tears poured out uncontrollably. Why did you suddenly come out? I clutched his clothes, tears streaming down. What about that person? What about Shen Xiu? He cupped my face with one hand, forcing me to look up. His soft, burning kiss landed on my lips, and the other arm around my waist tightened slightly. That day I told you, this year's spring begonias would bloom. Today is your birthday, Zhao. I have to be with you to see the flowers bloom one more time. I wouldn't even dare to hope for such a scene in my dreams. The lips and tongue entwining with mine were as scorching as the fingertips brushing against thin fabric, as though flames were burning. In my past life, due to the modesty and restraint expected of women in the boudoir, before marriage, I had never once crossed boundaries with Xie Chonglou. Thus, when everything suddenly collapsed, I never had the chance to be physically close to the real Xie Chonglou again. I think perhaps the heavens gave me a second chance to make up for this regret. Under a tree of begonia flowers, Xie Chonglou finally ended the long kiss. He gently nudged my nose with his and, in a soft voice, said, "These days, you come to the general's residence every day. Ziyuan is tired of it, but my heart is full of joy. Today, knowing it is your birthday, I broke free with all my strength, just to see you. Ah Zhao, I'm truly happy that I'm spending your 17th birthday with you. Perhaps because of being trapped within his own body for so long, there was a faint weariness in his gaze, yet his eyes were already bright and clear, reflecting the vivid colors of the begonia flowers. In his eyes, I saw an entire spring in full bloom. Coming back to myself, I asked softly, "Who is Ziyuan?" "He is the soul living inside me." I heard Shen Xiu call him that. Xie Chonglou patiently explained to me. When they are alone, they always speak strange words that I don't understand, but they seem to understand each other very well. A few times, I heard Shen Xiu mention their place, as if they come from a world different from ours. After a moment of silence, I finally asked the crucial question. "So, when Ziyuan occupies your body, can you still see and hear everything happening outside?"
Yes.
"But when I come out, he doesn't notice." The things Master Xuanchen had mentioned were confirmed by Xie Chonglou himself. My heart felt as if it had been struck by a heavy blow, and the tears I had just stopped now threatened to fall again. If that were the case, in my past life, Xie Chonglou must have been trapped in his body, witnessing everything that happened between the Liu and Xie families. He saw everything, he heard everything, but he couldn't do anything. "Don't cry, Ah Zhao." Xie Chonglou reached out, gently wiping away the tears that were about to fall from the corners of my eyes. In truth, he was not a gentle and calm person. In my past memories, Xie Chonglou was always lively and rebellious. When I was 14, he rode through the streets in fine clothes on horseback, with his red eyeliner as bright as blood, outshining all the scenery in the capital. For a long time after that, when girls of my age spoke of Xie Chonglou, they always viewed him as the ideal choice for a husband. He wasn't good at gentleness, and the few times he was tender and soft were always in front of me. Perhaps to cheer me up, he quickly changed the topic. "Actually, besides you, my parents should have sent something. They're very wary of Ziyuan. A few days ago, my mother went to Jinling Temple, probably to look for that old monk, Master Xuanchen, to see if he knew of any way to break the curse." When I heard about Xie's father and mother, a sudden chill ran through me, and I remembered their unusual deaths in my past life. If they had already sensed something strange about Xie Chonglou back then, Ziyuan must have feared the truth would be uncovered and poison them. That's why, before passing, Xie's mother had held my hand and said, "Now that I'm leaving, you should just think of him as going with me." She didn't tell me the truth, probably to protect me from Ziyuan, fearing he would harm me just as he did to them. Did Master Xuanchen tell Aunt Xie anything? Xie Chonglou slowly shook his head. I overheard when Ziyuan was listening in. Master Xuanchen had already left Jinling Temple and was traveling. My mother couldn't find him, so she returned empty-handed. Because of this, Ziyuan and Shen Xiu had an argument, and in the heat of the moment, I found a small opening and temporarily gained the upper hand. But that day, when I was betrayed by Shen Xiu on the southwest battlefield and trapped in enemy territory, Ziyuan suddenly appeared in my mind. After that, I couldn't control my own body. I think things aren't that simple. That day, when you briefly called me back, he mentioned a person from a book. Maybe that's the way to break it. As he spoke, his long lashes drooped, as if tired, and his voice softened, almost a whisper. "Ah Zhao, don't be afraid. If he really tries to harm you, I will come back, even if it means my soul is shattered." A breeze passed, and a few begonia petals were blown from the branches, falling on us. Xie Chonglou rested his head on my lap and fell asleep once again. He didn't tell me to give up, nor did he advise me to stop and find someone else. Even though this path might lead to danger, he understood me, just as I understood him. I carried Xie Chonglou on my back and walked step by step out of the begonia grove, instructing the coachman to drive the carriage back to the general's residence. Before Ziyuan woke up, I went to find Uncle Xie and Aunt Xie and solemnly told them. A few days before New Year's Eve, I went to Jinling Temple to meet Master Xuanchen. Aunt Xie's lips trembled, and she nearly cried. Ah, Zhao, you've sensed it too, haven't you? She staggered, and Uncle Xie hurriedly supported her. Yes, I also met the real Xie Chonglou.
Aunt, don't worry.
He's still alive. He hasn't disappeared, just temporarily unable to meet with you. I took a step back and bowed deeply to them. I will do everything I can to bring him back completely. But, before that, please take care of yourselves and don't let the imposter take advantage of the situation. As long as we're alive, we will meet again one day. When I returned to the Grand Tutor's residence, the sky had already completely darkened. My brother stood at the door waiting for me. As soon as he saw me get out of the carriage, he rushed over eagerly.
Zhao Zhao.
I noticed the serious look in his eyes and was momentarily stunned. What's wrong? Once we reached the inner hall, my brother finally spoke. Several days ago, heavy rains caused flooding in the 13 states of Beihang, 800 miles west of here. The riverbanks broke, flooding into the city, causing great suffering for the people. Bandits have also begun to run rampant. There have long been traders hiding in Beihang. Now they've mixed with the bandits and have quietly made their way toward the capital. I suddenly understood. So, that's why the officials were so urgently looking for you?
Yes.
The capital will soon be in turmoil, with strict checks at the city gates. Zhao Zhao, you should stay in the residence for now. He paused, then continued. Xie Chonglou, as a general, will lead troops to patrol the city. If I encounter him, I'll offer my greetings. For the next half-month, I stayed inside the residence and could only gather bits of news from the servants' casual conversations. It was clear that dark currents were surging in the capital. With nothing to do in the house, I decided to write down everything I had dreamed of that day, along with all the clues I had gathered from Xie Chonglou, Master Xuanchen, and my past life. I put it all down on paper. If what Ziyuan said was true, then Xie Chonglou and I were just characters in a story. Those two who appeared high and mighty, always looking down on me, Ziyuan and Shen Xiu, were the ones who had read the story. The real Shen Xiu was silent and withdrawn, even in death, but this strange soul was open about its ambition and disdain for me. Master Xuanchen had said that obsession could break anything. Xie Chonglou had said that perhaps the term characters from a book was the key to unlocking the truth. Frowning, I took up the brush and made several marks on the paper, then heavily circled the phrase, "The plot cannot be changed," that Ziyuan had spoken that day. Suddenly, a flash of light crossed my mind. No.
The plot can indeed be changed.
If everything I had seen in my dream was what had happened in the book, and everything I had experienced in my past life was the result of Ziyuan and Shen Xiu altering the story, then, based on how arrogant they were in this life, they still saw me as the same naive Lu Zhaoyi from the original book. They didn't know that I had lived through it all once before. Perhaps that was the key to breaking the situation. I dropped the paper and ink and went out, planning to ask my brother about the current situation in the capital. Halfway there, I bumped into Yunyang from the kitchen. She was talking to a young maid, her back to me. Yesterday, I went out to buy supplies and, on the way, I ran into Master Xuanchen. The young maid asked curiously, but didn't Master Xuanchen leave the capital for his travels? With the bandits everywhere outside the capital and so many refugees, the capital is still the safest place. Yunyang shook her head. When I met him, he was covered in dust, with wounds on his face. It looked like he'd suffered quite a bit. I made a note of this in my mind. When I reached the study, I ran into my father and brother. Both of them looked very serious. Xie Chonglou's actions are truly disgraceful. He no longer has any ties to the Lu family, and yet he's burdened old Xie, who, at his age, still has to clean up after him. I sensed something was off and quickly asked, "What happened to Xie Chonglou?" Zhao. My father hesitated before finally telling me. A few days ago, a group of bandits infiltrated the city through the southwest gate, which Xie Chonglou was in charge of guarding. They slaughtered the entire family of the capital's magistrate and left a letter of provocation. The emperor was furious and publicly reprimanded Xie Chonglou in court, stripping him of his second-rank general title. When it seemed like he might face imprisonment as well, old Xie stepped forward to plead for him. He voluntarily surrendered most of his military authority, which is the only reason Xie Chonglou wasn't punished further. Now both father and son have been confined to their residence by imperial order. My mind exploded with a loud bang. From my father's worried gaze, I could see my own pale face. In my past life, there had also been bandits entering the capital, but it didn't cause such a big uproar. My brother furrowed his brows. At least you didn't marry into it. But how did Xie Chonglou suddenly become like this? Could it be the result of mingling with those spoiled young men in the capital? Spoiled young men. The ones from the Zhou Imperial concubines family. They've always been unruly, frequenting gambling houses and brothels. Xie Chonglou used to look down on them, but recently, for some reason, he got close to them. I've seen them drinking together at inns twice. My brother trailed off and quickly reached out to support me. Zhao. I gripped his hand with cold fingers, forcing a smile. Brother, I'm fine. But how could I be fine? This was Xie Chonglou, the one who had single-handedly repelled the Northern Chong when he was only 15, the one famous in the capital, the proud and unyielding Xie general, the clear-minded youth who sang to the sound of a drum under the moon, the one who struck his sword on the ground to play music. How could they let him become like this?
How could they?
I returned to my room with a pale face, thinking for a long time. In the end, I decided to go back to Jinling Temple to find Master Xuanchen and ask him. Early the next morning, Zhaoyi prepared the carriage and we set off together. The carriage climbed along Ruohua Mountain, but halfway up, it suddenly stopped. The outside was eerily quiet, and the scent of blood gradually filled the air. My heart sank. I suddenly lifted the curtain, and the driver's body fell in front of me. The guards who had been surrounding us were also sprawled on the ground, lifeless. Miss. Zhaoyi panicked and tried to pull me back, attempting to shield me, but I shook my head, pushed her to the back, and whispered, "Stay hidden." Jumping out of the carriage, I surveyed my surroundings and immediately spotted Shen Xiu leaning lazily against a tree not far away. In that instant, I understood everything. Lu Zhaoyi. She sneered. You really dare to come? I looked at her quietly. How did you bribe the chef who had been with my family for 10 years? If you were in a lowly position and offered 100 taels of gold, would you refuse to speak a few words to those high-ranking masters? You fool. The bandits who killed the capital's magistrate's family are still at large, and yet you boldly ran out here for a man. Isn't that what you're doing? I smiled slightly. You're in love with Xie Chonglou, but he's indifferent to you. You didn't hesitate to find a fake, pretending to like him, even convincing yourself that you two were already in love. Shut up. Shen Xiu's expression changed suddenly, and she shouted at someone behind me, "Tie her up." My heart sank. I instinctively reached for the dagger hidden at my side, but the people behind me were faster. A heavy blow struck my neck. Before my vision went completely black, I saw the man who knocked me unconscious. His face bore a deep scar running across his cheek. It seemed like the leader of the bandits, who had killed the capital's magistrate's family, had such a face, as my brother had told me. I woke up again in a swaying carriage. The inside of the carriage was completely covered by thick curtains, making the light dim. I couldn't tell whether it was day or night. Outside, it seemed like it was raining again, the sound of the rain fast and dense. My hands were bound, and it was difficult for me to sit up, bracing against the wall of the carriage. My fingers couldn't reach the dagger, no matter how I tried. Don't move. A cold voice suddenly spoke beside me. Even if you break the ropes, you won't escape. The ones who caught you are desperate people. If you make them anxious, they'll kill you on the spot. One knife is all it takes. It was Shen Xiu. I froze for a moment before I couldn't help but laugh. What's this? Did the people you hired turn on you? She didn't answer, and I looked around carefully in the dimness, relieved that I couldn't see Zhaoyi. After a long silence, Shen Xiu suddenly said, "It wasn't me. It was Xie Chonglou. The bandits didn't sneak into the city. He intentionally let them in. I didn't expect these people to be so insane. They took the money, but still wouldn't let me go." Her tone carried a sense of regret, as though she was second-guessing herself. But I knew clearly that her regret wasn't about trying to harm me, but that she had chosen the wrong people to hire, leading herself into danger. She was selfish, cruel, and unbearably malicious, nothing like the original Shen Xiu. She had used the guise of speaking up for her to commit despicable acts. Before Shen Xiu could finish, the carriage suddenly stopped. The curtain was abruptly lifted, revealing a face with a twisted, grim smile. "Both of you, ladies, please step out." They dragged Shen Xiu and me out of the carriage and pushed us into a shabby house. As soon as we stood in the main hall, Shen Xiu angrily demanded, "How dare you? You took the money and still did this? Aren't you afraid Xie Chonglou will come after you?" The man with the scar on his face, sitting in front, smiled when he heard her. If it were the Xie Chonglou from before, I would have feared him. But now, he's busy walking dogs and fighting chickens. He's even worse than the young masters in the city. He let me into the capital, and now he expects me to spare his woman? Shen Xiu gritted her teeth and turned her head, cursing under her breath. "Damn it, useless lapdog." The man's face darkened. His men immediately stepped forward and slapped Shen Xiu across the face. That slap seemed to wipe away Shen Xiu's remaining sanity. She began to scream, but they covered her mouth and dragged her away. Soon, I was left alone in the hall with the scarred man. He rubbed his chin and looked at me with interest. Xie Chonglou said his former fiancée was a delicate young lady. Now, I can see the resemblance to the esteemed Lu Taifu. "No wonder you're Lu Zhaoxian's sister. You know my brother?" "Not only do I know him," he said, a flash of malice passing through his eyes. "Lu Zhaoxian chased me all the way into the capital. If it weren't for Xie Chonglou covering for me, I'd already be in prison. Miss Lu, your brother is making it hard for me. So, how should I treat you?" He slowly approached me, gripping my chin, examining me for a moment, then suddenly drew the short knife from his waist and pressed it against my throat. I looked at him calmly. "You won't kill me. Miss Lu is very smart. I still need you to exchange for something, so I won't kill you." He lowered the short knife, gesturing with his large hand. "Take her away. Oh, and search her. Don't leave any blades behind. It wouldn't be good if Miss Lu got hurt." I felt a sinking feeling in my heart. The dagger hidden at my side was taken away. Shen Xiu and I were locked in the same storage room with guards posted at the door and windows. Actually, I still had a weapon on me, a plain silver bracelet on my wrist. It looked unremarkable, but when I pressed a button and locked it back, it could turn into a sharp little knife. It was something Xie Chonglou had designed for me when he was 13, a means of self-defense. But given the situation, even taking it out wouldn't help. It was better to observe for a few more days and wait for a better opportunity. Shen Xiu and I were locked in the storage room for 2 days. During this time, I overheard bits and pieces of conversation from the guards outside, which helped me piece together what was happening outside. The day I was knocked unconscious and taken away, Zhaoyi had stabbed a horse's back and let the carriage run wild, heading deep into Ruohua Mountain. By dawn, she returned to the Taifu residence, badly injured. When my brother heard about this, he immediately gathered troops and searched from the city to the outskirts. It seemed that Ziyuan, who had taken over Xie Chonglou's body, followed behind, looking anxious. I thought to myself, he must be here to find Shen Xiu. That evening, while I was leaning against the wall, pondering my next move, the scarred man suddenly kicked open the door. His eyes swept over me and Shen Xiu, and he coldly ordered, "Take them." Under the cover of night, we started heading west again. I suddenly realized that my brother leading the troops had probably found this place. They were now forced to move me and Shen Xiu. We were the last bargaining chips. In the dead of night, the carriage stopped in a desolate field full of wild grass. It had started raining again, and the mist from the rain mixed with the night. The scarred man's men dragged Shen Xiu and me out of the carriage and shoved us into position behind him. Using the faint moonlight leaking through the rain, I saw a figure standing not far ahead. Xie Chonglou. My heart lifted, and I was about to speak when Shen Xiu already cried out, "Susan, you bastard! Why did you come so late?"
Wait.
That wasn't Xie Chonglou. He glanced indifferently at me, then his gaze landed on Shen Xiu. Seeing her in such a disheveled state, a hint of pity flashed in his eyes. The scarred man smiled and said, Xie Xiaojun, you know, we killed the capital's Fuyin and are carrying a debt of blood. We can't get away from it. The money you gave before probably wasn't enough, so we had to resort to this. He looked unpleasant as he asked, How much more do you want? The scarred man held up 2 fingers. 10,000 taels of gold for one person. Fair enough, right? Ziyuan coldly replied, I'll give you 10,000 taels, but I only need one person. As for the other, let her brother save her. Right in front of me, he handed the gold bills and a box of loose gold to the scarred man. Then, he took Shen Xiu away from my side, untied her bonds, and urgently asked if she was hurt. As Shen Xiu responded, she glanced at me, her expression smug and contemptuous. She spoke with a pointed tone. Lu Zhaoyi, for a noble lady like you, chastity is probably more important than life itself, right? If you lose your chastity, don't even mention Xie Chonglou. Do you really think there's any family in the capital that values reputation enough to still marry you? After saying this, she and Ziyuan rode off together, leaving in the rain. The scarred man turned around and looked at me. Miss Lu, it seems no one is willing to save you now. No one is saving me. What are you going to do to me? Naturally. Before he could finish, someone stumbled toward us from behind, crashing into the rain-soaked ground, crying out with heart-wrenching grief. Big brother, second brother was shot dead by the people Lu Zhaoxian brought. My heart sank into a bottomless abyss. The scarred man's expression darkened, and his gaze turned cold and sharp as he looked at me. After a moment, he slowly said, Well then. Miss Lu, a life for a life. Your brother killed so many of my men. Even if their lives were worthless together, they should be enough to exchange for yours, right? Miss Lu, I don't want your life. I want your chastity. He cut the ropes binding me with his short blade and then traced the blade down my dress, exposing my bare shoulder. This pampered young lady from the Lu family, let's see how your delicate body looks when it's sprawled out for us rough men to admire. He sheathed the short knife and ordered his subordinates, strip her down and hang her naked on the tree for Lu Darren to see. I couldn't help but tremble, my fingers shaking as they grasped the silver bracelet on my wrist, pressing the mechanism and clicking it into place, transforming it into a small knife. And so what? I tried to keep my voice steady. Chastity means little to me. I don't care, and neither does Xie Chonglou. Do you really think you can force me to die this way? The scarred man stepped closer, a sinister smile on his face. But Miss Lu, your voice is trembling. This was the moment. I suddenly raised my hand, driving the small knife into his eye. Warm blood splattered on the back of my hand, and the foul scent spread in the air. In the same motion, my already torn dress was shredded even further, nearly falling completely off, revealing a pale, white undergarment. The spring camellia hairpin in my hair dropped and shattered. The scarred man screamed, clutching his eye. Kill her. In the nick of time, the sound of hooves pounding approached rapidly. The moonlight, mixed with the rain, fell as someone broke through the wind, trampling several bandits with their horse. Amid the chaos, he grabbed me, pulling me tightly into his arms. His voice was hoarse and filled with anguish, but his eyes were as bright as the stars. Ah, Zhaoyi. It was Xie Chonglou, the real Xie Chonglou. I curled up in his arms as the horse galloped, the noise behind us growing fainter. Only the steady patter of rain and the cold wind brushing past my ears remained. Ah, Zhaoyi. He used one hand to wipe away the rain on my face, but when he touched the warmth in the corner of my eyes, he suddenly shuddered, his voice cracking. I'm sorry, Zhaoyi. I'm late. The tension of the past few days loosened in that moment. I wanted to say something, but when I opened my mouth, no sound came out. Instead, tears streamed down my face silently. There were many things I wanted to say, like how I knew you would come, how much I missed you, how in past lives I wished for you to come to me like this, holding me and pulling me out of the mud I stepped into, and then saying, "Ah, Zhaoyi, I'll take you away." But in the end, I couldn't say anything, because I knew it wasn't over yet. Xie Chonglou's soul would be suppressed again, and that vile Ziyuan would reclaim his body. I didn't know when I could find a real way to break through this and bring him back completely. All we could have now was this brief rescue in the rain and an uncertain future. Xie Chonglou held me tightly, calling my name again and again in the heavy rain. "Ah, Zhaoyi. Ah, Zhaoyi." I couldn't respond, but he solemnly said, "I will never leave you again." His tone was earnest, as if making a promise. I didn't know how to answer. I turned to look at him, but I saw the emotions in his eyes suddenly surge violently. After a moment, he gritted his teeth, and a low growl of anger escaped his lips. "Get out of my body." As soon as the words left his mouth, he thrust a dagger into his shoulder. Perhaps the pain was too intense. The fiery emotions in his eyes began to fade. A chill ran through me, and I suddenly recalled what Shen Xiu had said before, so I quickly pressed on. "Shen Xiu called you useless, said you were a lickspittle. She never cared for you. The one she really liked was Xie Chonglou. If you weren't in Xie Chonglou's body, why would she even glance at you?" The atmosphere froze, and the turbulent emotions in Xie Chonglou's eyes suddenly faded. A brilliant light began to shine, like a star falling into the world in the dark, rainy night. The rain gradually stopped, and the morning light faintly lit the sky, a golden beam shining from the pale, white edge of the clouds. Xie Chonglou stopped in front of the Taifu's mansion, wrapping me in his drenched cloak, and strode inside. "Zhao Zhao." My mother's voice came, choked with tears. Then the light dimmed as my father stood in front of Xie Chonglou, his face full of anger as he slapped him across the face. "Xie Chonglou." In just 3 days, his voice seemed to have aged by many years. "My Lu family has never wronged you in the slightest. Even if Zhao Zhao was willful and sought the Empress Dowager to cancel the engagement, you had grievances, but you should have directed them at me." Why? He almost couldn't finish, waving his hand, signaling Xie Chonglou to take me into the room. My wet hair stuck to my face, and he carefully placed me on the soft couch, bending over to gently comb my disheveled hair. Zhaoyi cried, holding my cold hand. "Miss. Ah, Zhaoyi, take a bath and change into clean clothes." Xie Chonglou whispered, "From now on, I'll handle everything." A whole night had passed since he saved me. Ziyuan's soul had been silent since I spoke those words. Had it disappeared, or was it just lying dormant? I didn't know. After I finished bathing and changed into a new dress, I stepped out to find Xie Chonglou kneeling in the courtyard before my parents. My father, who had been a refined and scholarly grand tutor for half his life, was now glaring at Xie Chonglou, his eyes filled with anger. "From today onward, you and the Lu family have no further ties." "Dad," I said anxiously, running over while holding up my skirt. I wanted to explain, but I didn't know how to begin. However, Xie Chonglou suddenly looked up at me. His eyes were bright, silently telling me, "Zhao Zhao, you don't need to plead for me. Uncle, all the fault lies with me." He bowed respectfully to my father. When he straightened up, there was a hint of coldness in his normally clear voice. "I will give you, Aunt, and Zhao Zhao an explanation for this matter." Father still had a cold expression. "I don't want your explanation, Xie Chonglou. I only wish that you never set foot in the Lu residence again." After dinner, my older brother returned. He led the troops and chased the bandits outside the city for over 200 miles, finally clashing with them again. Apart from the scarred face who had lost an eye and a few subordinates, the rest of the bandits were killed. Along the way, they found Shen Xiu, who had been thrown under a tree and was already unconscious. Despite his reluctance, my brother had her brought back to the capital and sent to the Xianping Marquis residence. When he heard that Xie Chonglou had brought me back during the day, my brother's expression turned icy. How dare he still show his face at the Lu residence? "Dad, Mom, Do you know that Xie Chonglou found Zhao Zhao before me but only took Shen Xiu away? He left Zhao Zhao with those bandits almost. At the last few words, my brother couldn't continue. His eyes were tinged with red as he looked at me, filled with heartache. In my past life, after I married Xie Chonglou, my brother had come to visit several times, but he was stopped outside the general's residence. I swallowed my bitterness, feeling ashamed to face them, so I never saw them again. Later, the emperor, wary of the Liu family, found a pretext and exiled my brother to a small city on the frontier as a governor. He was not allowed to return to the capital unless ordered by the emperor. For several years, until the day I died, he never returned. Now, hearing his words, my parents both looked at me, their eyes filled with pain and anger. The pain was for me, while the anger, of course, was directed at Xie Chonglou. I knew I couldn't hide it from them any longer. I turned around to close the door, then turned back and said seriously, "Mom, Dad, brother, think carefully. Xie Chonglou and I have been childhood sweethearts for 16 years.
He was also taught by Uncle Xie.
How could he have acted like this?" My brother coldly replied, "People change." Yes, people do change. In my past life, I had seen it with my own eyes, convincing myself with this kind of reasoning and neglecting all the unreasonable details during the endless days of suffering. Or perhaps the truth was too bizarre, and I was too weak to think too deeply. I took a deep breath and said, "That wasn't Xie Chonglou. It was a strange soul residing in his body." My parents and brother stared at me wide-eyed. After a moment, my brother suddenly reached out and covered my mouth. "Zhao Zhao, be careful with your words." The emperor almost fell victim to the witchcraft curse. He dislikes anything related to these supernatural matters. But my father had a serious expression. So, all those absurd actions from him were caused by that strange soul? Yes. After a long silence, my father finally sighed. Even if we believe it, the emperor won't. His actions were too absurd. The bandit invasion alone has displeased His Majesty. If there is another incident, it might lead to a legitimate punishment. The candlelight flickered, casting a dim glow. I looked at my parents and brother. Their expressions were solemn, and their gazes were full of worry. I pressed my lips together and softly said, "If that day really comes, I will do everything I can to not drag the Liu family down." "Liu Zhaoyi," my brother shouted coldly. I had never heard him speak to me with such sternness. "You are the daughter of the Liu family, my sister. We as a family are always one." The candlelight flickered around us, and his handsome face was tinged with coldness. "I will find a way." In the following days, I did not see Xie Chonglou again. I heard that he, accompanied only by Deputy General Guan, rode out of the capital and headed toward Beijing, where the scarred man had fled. Meanwhile, my brother began secretly contacting his colleagues in the court who had strong connections, trying to find a way to clear Xie Chonglou of his charges. I couldn't help but feel guilty. My mother noticed this and specially brought my favorite pastries and sweet soup to visit me in my room. "Zhao Zhao, your brother is doing this because he cares about you. We all saw how you became absent-minded and gradually more worn out, but there was nothing we could do. Now, he can help you, and instead of reproaching him, we should be glad." I felt a little bitter and said, "I understand. But this matter started because of me. The emperor already has suspicions about the Liu family, and now with my brother's actions, if it's seen as forming factions or seeking personal gain." My mother gently embraced me, making me lie on her lap like I did when I was younger, and softly stroked my hair. "Don't worry, Zhao Zhao. Your father will handle it." However, the matter was far from over. In the following days, I overheard the servants gossiping. It was said that Shen Xiu in the Xianping Marquis residence had a high fever and, while unconscious, kept calling out the names of Xie Chonglou and some strange man. At times, she would be silent and not speak at all. Soon after, rumors started to spread in the capital, saying that the Liu family's daughter had been kidnapped by bandits and lost her chastity. Now she was considered ruined, a fallen woman. Some even expressed relief for Xie Chonglou, saying that he was lucky I had already called off the marriage, thus avoiding disaster. It was at this time that Xie Chonglou finally returned to the capital. He rode over 800 miles, bringing back the scarred man's head, and entered the palace to see the emperor. When I heard about his return, it was said that Shen Xiu had blocked his horse at the city gates but was almost trampled by the hooves. She was frightened and forcibly taken back to the Xianping marquis residence, where she was kept in seclusion. The emperor was slightly relieved when he saw the bandit leader's head. Then, some court officials spoke in favor of Xie Chonglou, so the emperor decided to pardon him, restore his original position, and soon he will depart to pacify the 13 states of Beijing. After my brother returned home, he found me immediately. After court, Xie Chonglou went to seek an audience with the Empress Dowager, begging her to reinstate the marriage between you two. I stood frozen in place. The Empress Dowager has agreed. The news that the Empress Dowager had consented to the marriage spread quickly throughout the capital. It was said that General Xie was extremely displeased about this and had blocked my father on the way out of court. The two of them argued fiercely, exchanging harsh words, and their many years of friendship ended that day. I understood my father's plan. He must have discussed with Uncle Xie to completely sever the ties between the Liu and Xie families, hoping that the emperor would no longer be wary or suspicious. At dusk, as the evening light faded, Xie Chonglou came once again to the Grand Tutor's residence to seek an audience, but was stopped at the door by my brother. Zhao has just recovered from a serious illness and needs rest. General Xie, please return. That night, in a flash of red, Xie Chonglou once again climbed over the wall and landed outside my window, smiling as he looked at me. Ah Zhao, I'm back. My nose tingled, and tears welled up in my eyes. Xie Chonglou. It was early summer, and he still carried the coolness from late spring. The moonlight was scattered like broken fragments, and in that glow, he pulled me tightly into his arms, burying his face in my shoulder. I softly asked him, will we ever part again? It may have been the unbearable pain of the blade passing through my shoulder, or the blow of realizing that Shen Xiu did not actually care for me. But in any case, over the past few days, I repeatedly tested it and confirmed that Ziyuan's soul has completely left my body. I murmured, is that so? I had already guessed as much, but perhaps due to the influence of my past life, there was a lingering unease in my heart. Xie Chonglou's hand, which was around my waist, suddenly tightened. Ah Zhao, you're trembling. What are you afraid of? He pulled back slightly but remained very close, his eyes gazing at me with a depth that seemed to contain the first rays of moonlight from the beginning of time. I felt as though I might drown in his gaze. For a moment I was lost. I took a deep breath and whispered, do you remember that dream? I don't know why, but I always feel like everything isn't over yet, and the scenes from the dream will happen again. Xie Chonglou remained silent for a long time. His gaze darkened little by little. Just as I thought he might deny my thoughts, he suddenly pulled me even closer, holding me tightly. Ah Zhao, his voice trembled slightly. Was that really just a dream? His warm fingertips traced the side of my waist, gently moving upward and stopping near my face. Xie Chonglou had hands that were exceptionally beautiful, with distinct knuckles and long fingers. From years of martial arts practice, his palms had thin calluses, yet they appeared lean and powerful. He caressed my face, brushing my messy hair aside and forcing me to tilt my face upward, making me look into his eyes. The moonlight in them cracked open like a seam, revealing hidden, secret pain beneath. My throat tightened and suddenly, I couldn't speak a word. On the way to Beijing, I kept having a fragmented dream. The scenes in it were exactly like what you told me about that day. But Ah Zhao, you would never vent your anger on reality because of a dream, nor would you impulsively ask the Empress Dowager to call off the marriage over things that hadn't even happened. Unless these things truly, genuinely happened. Xie Chonglou, who hadn't even flinched when the blade passed through his shoulder, suddenly had reddened eyes before me, which made the beauty mark on his face seem even more striking, as though it might bleed. Ah Zhao, tell me? Perhaps the pain was too intense, and his voice became slightly muffled. These things, the scenes from the dream you told me about, did you really experience them? After confirming the existence of Su Ziyuan's soul, I refused to think about past life matters for a long time. The pain was something I brought upon myself when I was trapped in the maze. But now, as Xie Chonglou suddenly mentioned it, I realized with a start that I had never forgotten. I even blamed myself, resenting that in my past life, I couldn't see the truth clearly and stubbornly clung to my obsessions, leading to such an ending and dragging the Liu family down with me. Now, faced with Xie Chonglou's question, I could only remain silent. The atmosphere was tense for a moment. He pinched my chin, softly calling, "Zhao," before a burning kiss fell upon me, overwhelming me. There were still many uncertainties and questions in my mind, like even though Su Ziyuan had temporarily disappeared, Shen Xiu was still here. Like where exactly they came from. Like, if Xie Chonglou and I were truly the characters from the story, would the fate of the Liu and Xie families still unfold as I saw in my dream? But everything, vanished for a moment in Xie Chonglou's deep and lingering kiss. At this moment, I could not think of anything else. My heart and my eyes were filled only with him. This was my Xie Chonglou, the moon that had descended to earth, so close I could reach it. Finally, I choked out in a whisper. "The hairpin you gave me broke." "I'll carve another one and give it to you when I return," he mumbled in response. "This time, you can teach me how to." The kiss lasted a long time before he pulled back slightly, breathing gently, and held me again, his lips close to my ear. "Zhao, it's all over, it's all over. Don't remember those things. None of it was your fault. I won't let anything happen to you again, and I won't let the Liu and Xie families be harmed either. Zhao, just stay in the capital and wait for me to come back and marry you." Later that night, Xie Chonglou left through the window. Under the soft moonlight, his figure in red was sharp and upright. When he turned to look at me, the rebelliousness in his gaze slightly softened, turning into a piercing edge. I stood by the window, looking up at him. At that moment, I didn't know that his departure was a journey of near death, a fate that had been sealed long ago. 3 days later, Xie Chonglou led 5,000 elite soldiers and left the capital, heading towards Beihang. On the 5th day after he left, the emperor suddenly issued an imperial edict. He declared that both Shen Xiu and I would be conferred as beauties and would immediately enter the palace to serve in the emperor's harem. After the eunuch read out the imperial edict, he smiled and bowed to me. "Liu beauty, please." I froze in place, and my brother quickly handed over a gold ingot, pulling the eunuch aside to speak softly and inquire. The eunuch's sharp voice barely reached my ears. "I'm just doing what I'm told. The emperor really favors Miss Liu, though the Empress Dowager doesn't approve. But after all, she's the emperor's biological mother, so she went along with it. As for the matter with young General Xie, what kind of person is guarding Beihang? You should persuade Miss Liu to settle down and not anger the emperor." My face turned pale in an instant. In that moment, a wild thought jumped out of the depths of my heart and surged to the surface with a sharp force. After Su Ziyuan's soul disappeared, where did it go? The carriage carried me into the palace. In the dim night, I exchanged a glance with Shen Xiu, who had also just dismounted from her carriage. I saw a flash of resentment in her eyes. Inside the Chaoyang Palace, the young emperor was dressed in sleepwear. His gaze swept over me and then fixed on Shen Xiu's face. His expression was complex, a mix of anger and resentment, but it finally turned into a clear hatred. "Shun beauty, Liu beauty, you both stay in the palace for now. Xie Chonglou will not be returning." After a moment of silence, I suddenly shouted, "How dare you? Su Ziyuan, how dare you? The emperor is a wise ruler, and Xie Chonglou is a loyal subject. You, however, are nothing but a rootless, wandering ghost. How dare you harm Xie Chonglou and then bring disaster to the emperor? Do you know how important the destiny of the great Shu and the people are?" After speaking, my back was drenched in cold sweat. I was gambling that the body of the emperor contained Su Ziyuan's soul, and that, like Xie Chonglou in the past, the emperor could hear and see everything happening around him. Surprise flashed across the emperor's face for a moment before he began to laugh recklessly. Miss Liu, you're very clever. Not the kind of boring, beautiful young lady I thought you were. But you're wrong. Great choose destiny, the common people. What does that have to do with me? Whether it's the emperor or General Xie, they're all just ants in my eyes. But you. He took a step down the stairs, stopping in front of Shen Xiu. He raised her chin with one hand. Xuanchen, I've liked you for so many years. I'll follow you wherever you go. Even if you want to enter the story, I'll use all my savings to go with you. But how have you been calling me in front of others? A backup? A fool? His expression suddenly changed, becoming fierce and terrifying. With one slap, he sent her to the ground. Now I'm the emperor, the highest position in the feudal system, holding the power of life and death over you. Do you still dare to call me that? Shen Xiu, no. Xuanchen looked up at him. Her expression changed several times, and in the end, she softened. Emperor. I stood to the side, frowning as I watched them. A thought flashed in my mind, but it was too quick to catch. For the next few days, Xuanchen and I both lived in the harem. Although the Empress Dowager claimed to be ill, I still managed to find a way to visit her. In the dimly lit palace, the faint scent of sandalwood incense filled the air. She closed her eyes, gently holding the Buddhist beads in her hand. She slowly opened her eyes when she heard footsteps and looked at me. Zhaoyi. I bowed respectfully and said calmly, I come to wish the Empress Dowager good health. Not long ago, there was something strange with Chonglou. Although I didn't witness it with my own eyes, I've heard about it. She spoke softly, and now, the strange one has become the emperor. Zhaoyi, tell me, do you know the hidden truth behind this? As a mother, she had certainly noticed the emperor's abnormality. I was silent for a moment, then softly replied, a son does not speak of strange matters or untoward phenomena. I don't understand the ways of gentlemen and petty people, but I know the emperor is my child. He's the only son I have after living so many years. Through the faint smoke, her gaze was filled with earnestness as she looked at me. Zhaoyi, do you have any way? At least let me know that the emperor is safe. After a long silence, I finally stood up and respectfully knelt before her, bowing my head. I will do everything I can to bring the emperor back. At that time, please promise me, Empress Dowager, that if the emperor punishes me, you will not implicate my father and brother. Although Ziyuan had bestowed the title of beauty upon me, he never summoned me to his chambers. Instead, he frequently ordered people to summon Xuanchen. I once secretly followed to observe, hoping to find a way to break the spell. Through a window crack, I saw Ziyuan beating Xuanchen mercilessly. Serve me in bed? Don't dream. I'm now the emperor. With a harem of 3,000 beauties, a loose woman like you. Do you think I would have any interest? That night, after returning to my chambers, I pondered deeply. Ziyuan had said that he had used all his savings to come here with Xuanchen. Therefore, after leaving Xie Chonglou's body, if he were to enter the emperor's body again, he would surely have to pay another price. And it would likely be a heavier one than the previous time with Xie Chonglou. More importantly, based on previous events, it seemed these foreign souls could not withstand intense pain and emotional turmoil. Whenever they were injured, they would be temporarily suppressed. After 2 days of hesitation, I finally made up my mind. That night, dressed in a light summer gown, I went to Ziyuan's chambers, offering myself to him. He sat at the edge of the bed, looking at me with interest. Oh, weren't you deeply in love with Xie Chonglou, claiming you would never marry anyone else? Why are you here looking for me now? Is it because you can't bear the loneliness? I lowered my voice. Xie Chonglou's fate is uncertain, and I have entered the palace as a beauty. Naturally, I must plan for my future. I knew it. You women are all like this, flirting with anyone and everyone, nothing but trouble. After scolding me, he lazily lay back on the bed. Come on then, be proactive and serve me. Let me see how sincere you are. I lowered my head in obedience, dragging the long hem of my gown as I sat on the couch, looking down at him. Before Ziyuan could react, a small knife slipped out from my sleeve and swiftly stabbed into his shoulder. Lu Zhaoyi. He leaped up like an enraged lion, grabbing my throat. But before he could exert force, I seized his collar, pushed him against the bed frame, and gritted my teeth, shouting, Ziyuan, you've already lost to me once. How dare you look down on me again? You belittle women, and in the end, you will die by their hands. Is that not karmic retribution? His eyes were filled with violent emotion, and I knew it was the Emperor's soul desperately trying to break free. Coldly I spoke. Emperor, the great Chu dynasty cannot be without you. In that instant, I suddenly heard a cold, unfamiliar voice. Time-Space Management Bureau, user number 682, Ziyuan, has used his life force to traverse again. The traversal ends now, and his life force is being reclaimed. Companion, user number 681, Xuanchen, is also being reclaimed. Anomaly detected in the small world. Closing the passage. I looked around in shock, but the hall was eerily empty. The Empress Dowager must have intervened and sent away the guards, giving me this rare opportunity. Moments later, the Emperor, lying motionless on the bed, slowly opened his eyes. His cold, imposing gaze swept over me, and I immediately realized this was no longer Ziyuan, but the true Emperor. I hurriedly knelt, dragging my blood-stained hands across the floor, and said, Your Majesty, I greet you. His voice came from above, full of unreadable emotion. Lu Zhaoyi, do you know the punishment for regicide? I steadied my nerves, replying calmly, I am not committing regicide, but I act in the interest of the great Chu dynasty. I only wish to expel the wandering soul from your Majesty's body. After a brief silence, he asked, You said before that Xie Chonglou's body was once occupied by that soul? I sighed in relief internally, as I had hoped I was right. Yes, Xie Chonglou's many rude actions in the past were all due to that soul. I spoke carefully, choosing my words. I don't know where that soul comes from, but it seems to deeply hate the great Chu dynasty. It has caused many harms to the people and the empire. Xie Chonglou, in order to expel it, even resorted to self-injury. I dared to guess that perhaps the injuries and pain might force that soul to retreat. Before I could finish, the door to the chambers was suddenly kicked open. Covered in blood, Xie Chonglou stepped into the room, his sword pointed at the Emperor. Ziyuan, you're just a lonely soul. Do you really think you can turn things around? My heart skipped a beat. I quickly shouted, Xie Chonglou, you are being disrespectful. He glared at the Emperor with a murderous intent, exhaustion evident in his features. He must have fought his way back from Baiheting, traveling non-stop just to see me. Before he left for the capital, his parting words echoed in my mind. Zhaoyi, wait for me in the capital. I will return to marry you. My heart ached painfully, and I could barely speak. Yet, I still managed to grit my teeth and say, Since you've returned, why haven't you greeted the Emperor? Xie Chonglou immediately realized what I meant. He supported himself on his sword and knelt. I, your humble servant, was distracted by concern and failed to observe the proper etiquette. Please, your Majesty, impose your punishment. No need for punishment. After a long pause, the Emperor's voice sounded, almost as if he was mocking. Minister Xie, your loyalty to the nation is clear. I know this well. That decree was issued when I was drunk, so it was not to be taken seriously. You should return with Lu Zhaoyi. Tomorrow, the Empress Dowager will issue a decree to grant you marriage. Yes, your Majesty. I thank you for your grace. I secretly breathed a sigh of relief, but was suddenly reminded of Xuanchen. Now that her soul had left her body, it seemed that the real Shen Xiu was waking up. Your Majesty, Miss Shen from the Xianping Marquis's residence. The Emperor looked at me deeply and said, I will issue a decree, ordering the Xianping Marquis to properly discipline his daughter. Once she learns the proper manners, I will grant her another marriage. Although the emperor refuses to believe in such strange supernatural matters after personally experiencing them, he has no choice but to believe. On the carriage ride home, Xie Chonglou softly explained to me. After a pause, he suddenly pulled me into his arms, lowered his head, and kissed my forehead. "Ah, Zhao, my good girl, you are so brave, so remarkable." He was still wounded, and my hands were stained with blood. Both our faces were weary, and the air was thick with exhaustion. On this hot summer night, even as the evening settled, the heat lingered, and the smell inside the dimly lit carriage was far from pleasant. Yet, amid the lingering scent of blood, I found a sense of peace, having survived the ordeal. I closed my eyes gently in Xie Chonglou's embrace. I was truly exhausted. Although my heart still held many questions, such as the whereabouts of Xuanchen and Ziyuan, and why in the previous life Xie Chonglou hadn't managed to escape his physical imprisonment, I didn't want to think about any of it at this moment. What I longed for with Xie Chonglou was simply this moment of tranquility. Xie Chonglou delivered me back to the Taifu mansion, said goodbye to my parents and my brother, and gave me a deep look before riding back to the general's residence. The next day, the Imperial marriage decree arrived. It is said that in the court, Xie's father and my father had a mock quarrel, but after the court session, the emperor summoned them both to the Imperial study. "Stop pretending," the emperor said flatly. "I'm not a fool. If I can't even tell the truth, then I don't deserve to be emperor." My father quickly knelt. "I have committed the crime of deceiving the emperor. Please punish me." "Minister Liu, you are a pillar of the state and the Taifu. How could I punish you?" the emperor replied. My father understood the unspoken words and quickly coughed twice, feigning weakness. "I am old and can no longer help His Majesty. I humbly ask His Majesty to allow me to retire and return home, no longer involved in state affairs." After a long silence, the emperor finally said softly, "Granted." When I heard this, my nose tingled. I hurriedly sought out my father's study and kneeled from afar. "It's my fault. I have implicated the Liu family." Zhao, this matter has nothing to do with you." My father quickly waved his hand, signaling my brother to help me up. Since I began my official career, I understood the meaning of "a minister too influential may shake the throne." Even without your marriage to Chonglou, this day would have come eventually. I am getting old, and the future of the Liu family is now entrusted to Yuan. Later, your mother and I will take care of flowers, travel together. Perhaps that is not so bad. In the dim light of the candle, my brother gently wiped the tears from the corners of my eyes. Zhao, if Xie Chonglou dares to bully you in the future, I will never let him get away with it. I held his hand, softly pouting. "Brother, you always treat me the best." Once the auspicious wedding date was chosen, Xie Chonglou had been preparing for a long time. He even moved several boxes of precious fabrics to our home, taking care of everything from my headpieces and jewelry to my wedding dress. I don't want to make Zhao suffer anymore. Under the soft moonlight, his smile shone brighter than the sun. "Zhao, you've done enough. From now on, you don't have to do anything else. Just wait to marry me beautifully." On the day of the wedding, I woke early to prepare. I worshipped the heavens and met the guests. By the time night fell, I finally settled down. After Xie Chonglou lifted my wedding veil and we drank the wedding wine, he dismissed the servants. With the curtain falling, he reached out, undid the ties of my clothing, revealing snow-white skin and a patch of early blooming red plum on a snowy mountain. Xie Chonglou bent down and whispered on my lips, "Zhao." The days after marrying Xie Chonglou were like this. No matter what, he would never let you suffer. I tightly shut my eyes, biting my lip, trying hard to break free from the painful memories that felt like a nightmare. Xie Chonglou gently cupped my face and kissed me, his voice soft but intense. "Zhao, open your eyes, look at me." I trembled and slowly opened my eyes, my vision clearing from blurry to clear. And right before me stood Xie Chonglou, just as gentle and passionate as I remembered him. In that moment, the painful memories slowly faded away. I finally wrapped my arms around his neck, meeting his kiss. After a long while, we finally fell asleep in the late hours. I had another dream. In the dream, I stood in front of the inferno at the general's residence, dressed in red, calling Xie Chonglou's name hoarsely. I smiled and shed tears. As an observer, I felt a deep, soul-piercing pain upon seeing that version of me. Ah Zhao. The familiar voice called out, and I suddenly realized it was Xie Chonglou. It was the Xie Chonglou from the past life, trapped within his own body, unable to escape. What he saw was a blindly devoted Lu Zhaoyi, unwilling to turn back until she hit the wall. In the intertwined mist and flames, I heard his voice, rough and mournful, as if crying blood. If there truly is a god or a Buddha, Xie Chonglou would give up everything, never entering reincarnation, just to start over. I pray for my parents and Lu Zhaoyi to live a peaceful life, free from harm, never encountering bad people. As for Xie Chonglou, life and death are in the hands of fate. End of the novel.